more against the wall simply because I think there's more efficient, like cost efficient and better ways to do that. But securing the border, 100%. Telling China to go F itself, yeah, long overdue. You know, I'll happily sing the praises of Trump too, because I'm fair. And I'm overall, if you ask me now in hindsight, after seeing how Trump was for 4 years, including the Capitol riots, am I happy that he got it over Hillary? 100% yes. I have no problem saying that. And that immediately, oh God, I could lose my job for that one. But I mean, just no, the idea of Hillary getting it terrifies me to this day. Trump, I was like, you know what? He's an utter buffoon. He's a clown, but he's random and he's difficult to control, which might have a bunch of positive benefits to it. Like that, better someone out of control, possibly, as long as they don't get crazy with the launch codes. Possibly, you know,
he didn't get the country into another war.
No, he didn't.
He was the first president in a long time.
He was trying to get him out of it. Yeah. So it's like, kudos to him. You know, I would rather take roll the dice with him than with Hillary. I thought that at the time, because Hillary, I'm like, that's guaranteed evil. That no, God no. And now in hindsight, I'm like, you know, it wasn't that bad. You can dress up his COVID handling to be as bad as you want, but there doesn't exist an alternate universe that we can check to see how many people would have died if Hillary was in there. So at the end of the day, you're only going to be speculating. You have nothing to check your answers with. There's one reality, it happened. So
yeah, one quote I like is that he might be the president who lied the most, but he's also the president who's been lied about the most. So a lot of the information that people get about what he did and his handling of COVID is not accurate.
He also kept the most promise. He kept most of his campaign promises. Even CNN had to admit that.
How rare is that? Yeah.
Oh, I mean, again, if we're singing his praises, let's not put it that way. If we're being fair, you just objectively ask the question. I'm sure you could figure this out, especially over, like, if you just made it like the last 25 years or something. You know, you just list all the campaign promises, the major campaign promises and campaign platform of each of the presidents that they made on the trail, and then look at what they did in office. I would bet dollars to donuts that Trump's number one with a bullet. And
wow.
Yeah, I would bet my apartment it ain't gonna be Obama. Like, so, you know, it just, I mean, and CNN had to admit that. CNN. And when CNN says something positive about Trump, you know that they are gritting their teeth every keystroke. I mean, they are pissed when they're writing that. No, they don't want to admit it. So if CNN says it, you know it's true. CNN says something good about Trump. That's always my litmus test. If CNN says it's good about Trump, or if Huffington Post says something good about Trump, oh, you know it's good. And the inverse is true. That's why it's really interesting to watch both sides. I read Daily Wire, Breitbart, Huffington Post, The Atlantic, Vox, The Root. Oh my goodness, the stuff that's being fed to leftist African Americans. Well, you and I are evil, by the way. Heads up. Irredeemably. I mean, I don't know what we're gonna do. Guess we'll just have to keep on trucking. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing to read that stuff with a critical eye, where you're just looking at it and saying, you're not looking at it in a frame of this is news. You're looking at it in a frame of this is what is being fed to the targeted demographic of this website, which is pretty easy to figure out what it is. And you view it that way. Doesn't mean that there aren't facts in there. Of course, there's tons of facts in there. They can't just outright lie, but they're not just, no one just reports the facts anymore. There's editorial slant built into every news article now. The idea of having an editorial section is ridiculous. No, it's the whole flip it. It's all the news. It's now, I guess what you do, guys like Ben Shapiro certainly, and Secular Talk, now you just identify your major bias and then say, you know, adjust as needed. This is my bias going forward.
Yeah.
and then take it or leave it. I want to get to somewhere even better than that, ideally, where you just have, I mean, true objectivity is impossible, but I mean, where you can just at least be so much disconnected and detached from it, where you can just kind of swap lenses in your head and be like, well, this is the Marxist interpretation of this event. This is the leftist sort of postmodernist interpretation of it. This would be more the tradcon, you know, Christian conservative interpretation of it. And you just treat them like lenses. And then, I don't know, for me, that immediately detaches all the emotion and craziness attached to each one of them, and people get so crazy. And it's like, here, how about just look at this as an interpretation of the event. So if you don't like that interpretation, here's another one. Which one is the most correct? I don't know. So all these different interpretations. How do we check the answer? Well, we don't. Ask God.
Well, you gotta look at data, right? There's
at the end of the day, I would recommend being a rationalist. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
If it's a database choice, if it's something, there's another thing that's going on where people don't really seem to understand the appropriateness of emotions anymore, if that's a way of putting it. Like, you have something like that. The most obvious one to me is on the left, where you have compassion being treated as the basically not only the default emotional state for interpreting anything, but the only one. It's everything has to be seen through a compassionate lens, as long as what you're viewing is like in group. As soon as it's out group, if what you're so if you're trying to think of a way to concretize that, if you're looking at a Democrat politician and a scandal involving them, you're going to view it very positively. If you're looking at a conservative, you're going to look at it very negatively. I mean, it would just be nice to get past that. It would be nice to be able to just like have a place where you could meet, where you could detach yourself from what you believes, detach all of that, and just be like, here's the different ways, the different major ways of viewing this situation. Let's look at each of them and just see what they have to say. And the very act of viewing them would do the work. That's why people like their bubbles and their echo chambers. That's why most people don't do what I do, which is cross-pollinate, which is deliberately read media that has very different, like opposite biases, and read their interpretation of the same event. Most people go out of their way to do the opposite, to do exactly the opposite of that. And of course, Google helps them because of the algorithms. The Google algorithms are only interested in giving you like with like. The last thing the Google algorithm wants to do is give you diverse opinion. Actually, every step Google's been making in the last 10 years has been away from that. So
in order to keep people watching, right? They want the most clickable links to show up in your
because confirmation bias sells. Everyone loves confirmation bias, and even the people who know what it is and know to guard against it still. Can I smash Gad Saad a little bit on your show, because I didn't feel like.
Do it. Well, let's talk about him.
Okay, because
I don't have
that enough justice.
Yeah.
Keeling and I just did a drive-by on him. We didn't do that enough.
You did. And I didn't jump in and ask why you don't like Gad Saad. So let's
go Oh, just because this actually is a natural segue. I had it in my notes of, like, in case I ran out of things to say, like, crap on Gad Saad. That doesn't get done enough.
Okay.
And again, I'd love to hear Keeling's thoughts on it too. He'll probably be coming at it a different way from me. But I had a brief Facebook correspondence with Mr. Saad that ended with him hurling a string of invectives at me that all impugned my character and then blocking me. Okay. I mean, again, I don't understand what he thinks that looks like, whatever. But my questioning to him was basically because I had watched, I became aware of him through Peterson, and you get a taste of Gad Saad, and he seems, it's like, oh God, this guy's really cool too. And so you get deeper into him though, and what I was running into with him was this whole Gadfather thing. And that concerned me a bit, and that concerned me a bit because of Stefan Molyneux, and I didn't want to see another Molyneux. I hate the fact that Molyneux is kind of piggybacking on a lot of this anti-leftist stuff right now, and getting another kick at the can. He really doesn't deserve it. He's just a cult leader. But so I was concerned about Gad Saad as another Canadian, and this whole Gadfather stuff. All the people in the YouTube comments calling him the Gadfather, and he's referring him to the. Now, of course, it's ironic. It's tongue in cheek. Okay, but here's the thing. He's a really sophisticated person. He's a really sophisticated person. So something that really sophisticated people do is they engineer circumstances where they get to have their ego kicks and they have plausible deniability. And that's only something that sophisticated people can do. And that's only something that sophisticated people can spot. Define sophisticated however you need to make that work. Point being that it just struck me, like, how can you be so how can you be encouraging that, even ironically, even quote unquote knowingly playing along with it? It's still going to be operating. It's still going to be buffing your ego. How are you actually encouraging that? Aren't you at all concerned that that might, like, he was posting all these just personal videos of like him playing hacky sack and stuff, and they were just getting just tons of attention and stuff like that. And I'm like, none of this has anything to do with why we're paying attention to you. This is all just like cult of personality stuff. And so I sent him some messages just saying, like, and I just used Peterson. I tried not to, as much as I could, compare him to Peterson, because I knew he must get that a lot. That must piss him off. But whatever, he owes him, and the comparison's just there. And Peterson, to me, is much more obviously the other way. Peterson openly talks about how he encourages people to take the piss out of him, to you know, the Kermit the Frog meme and all that sort of thing, stuff that's not really that complimentary. As he said, it's pokey. It's not going to inflate his ego in an obvious way, if at all. And he encourages that because he openly talks about the danger of riding that wave of popularity and suddenly thinking that you are infallible, that you are God, that you don't, and then you lose your common touch and everything goes with it. So I asked Saad, and I said, like, are you at all worried about that? You're encouraging this Gadfather thing a lot, and I know you're aware of it, but you must also be aware that even if you're aware of it, that will not absolutely protect you from its effects. And that question absolutely infuriated him. And he hurled a bunch of invective, called me a bunch of names, and blocked me. And
did he give you any reasoning though?
No. I'm not aware of any reasoning there could be. I'm not. If you put yourself, no, that's wrong. If you allow yourself to be put on a pedestal by other people, and you do not take active measures to counteract the natural effect that will have on your thought processes, on your ego, on your conception of self, in my opinion, it will affect you regardless of whether you're aware of it or not. And for somebody of his intellect and education, particularly in these fields, in these relevant fields, he's so much smarter than me. So why is he not guarding himself against this? Molyneux didn't, and we saw what happened with him.
Yeah, so what is your concern about it?
My concern is that he's going to become more wrapped up in the cult of personality than, and his thought processes are going to be corrupted. I haven't heard of anyone whose products of thought were improved by being surrounded by sycophants, by being surrounded by people who won't challenge you, who worship you. To me, like, if I was wishing upon my worst enemy a condition that would render that person incapable of wisdom or learning That's the condition I would wish upon them, to be surrounded by people who think that you're perfect, who think that nothing you says is wrong, or if they do think it, they're just too afraid to say it for whatever reason. That's the hell that I would wish upon my enemy, most of all because I know that if they fell for it, like even the smartest person in the world could fall for it. And once you fall for it, that's it. And it's just going to be a spiral into narcissism. And again, Keeling can talk all he wants about the positivity of narcissism. He's full of it. Narcissism is an incredibly destructive mental disorder. And again, I'm unaware, like the entire scientific method, peer review, all of that is built around the idea of doing exactly the opposite of what all that Gadfather nonsense is. It's based around, like, you go to a scientific convention, you got 1,000 people in a room speaking or listening to you speak, and they're all experts in the thing that you're speaking about. Every sentence you're going to start with is going to be a caveat, like somebody else in the room probably knows more about this. Maybe somebody else could fill in, because you know, because you know that you're fallible and that you don't have a perfect picture, and that's what you want. And that's what the scientific method is. So when I see and that, not just the scientific method, that's just what I think, not allowing yourself to slip into dangerous, narcissistic, egotistical thought patterns, which can happen to anybody who achieves any kind of notoriety or popularity and suddenly has, you know, the what are they called? The entourage accumulate around them. That should be the immediate moment. Look at what Joe Rogan does. He openly talks about it. He surrounds himself with people who challenge him, who don't put up with this crap. He brings guests on who think things different than him, who are willing to give it to him in the face, to argue with him, and who aren't kowtowing to his ego, who aren't sugarcoating things. That's clearly, I mean, if there's an argument for the supremacy of the sycophantic, ego boosting echo chamber over that method, if there's an argument for that, I've yet to hear it, and I'm confident it would be nonsense. So my problem with Saad was, like, I wasn't really suggesting it. I was like, you can be smarter than me and still be wrong about something, and you're wrong about this. You shouldn't be encouraging this, even as a joke. Even as an ironic thing to boost your popularity and boost the signal. I wouldn't, but
let's analyze it though. So
anyway,
let's analyze it a little bit. So it's the term Godfather and him being referred to as the Godfather. So that's a reference to the movie The Godfather and being a boss, a mob boss.
That's right.
Right.
Universally respected. Yeah.
Universally respected boss. So a leader, obviously. So what is it about the connotations and so can you go into that a little bit? Do you think, what are your thoughts on leadership?
Well, like on good leadership.
Good leadership, yeah.
Good leadership, again, the last thing a good leader would want would be, if the person was intelligent, would be to be surrounded by people who agree with you or are afraid to disagree with you. Because then if you're wrong about something as a leader, none of them are going to tell you that, if they're even capable of detecting it. So at that point, you literally have to be perfect.
So you're taking,
that's not what a great leader is. A great leader, any great leader who expects to lead by being perfect themselves will fail spectacularly. I mean, you have to be God. So great leaders, one of the things that makes a great leader is the ability to recognize great talent and to surround yourself with it. It's to have the best people around you. Even Trump, in his idiocy, understands that. It's one of the things that he constantly talked about, that he has the best people around him. Even Trump understands that. It's one of the most fundamental things about leadership. If you're a good leader, but you surround yourself with terrible subordinates and lieutenants, I would argue you're a terrible leader, because you're not, the product of your leadership is going to be terrible. No matter how good you are, if all your lieutenants and all the people carrying out your directives are garbage, how are you a good leader?
So, but have you seen any examples, any evidence of him being unwilling to be challenged?
Not yet. I haven't really paid that much attention.
So it's
unwilling,
just the term the Godfather mainly that bothers you?
The term and the cultivating of the term and the obvious, well, yeah, the cultivation of it, that would be the way to put it.
And
yeah.
the implications of that being referred to as the Godfather. So
the
do
lack
you
of
think
humility,
the implication, the lack of humility? Okay.
Yeah, that's a big, I mean, if I'm gonna put my finger on what like engaged my emotion right away that pissed me off, I was like, boy, that's arrogant, isn't it? Like, I get that your name naturally fits. No, right? You're right. I'll give him a bunch of caveats. He didn't invent it. You're right. His name does naturally fit right into it. I get it. I'll give it all that.
Sure.
But again, I don't know. I wouldn't do it if I was in this position. And Peterson isn't. Peterson's done the exact opposite of that. Peterson has resisted the deification of himself, and the impetus and the urge to deify Peterson is far greater than the Gadfather stuff. And Peterson's resisting it, and I think that's correct. Sam Harris resists his a lot as well. I think Shapiro does too. The Gadfather stuff, I don't know of anyone else who even ironically, who's a great thinker and even ironically accepts that sort of thing. It's like if you say to some scientist, you're the greatest living scientist in discipline X. Even if that was somehow demonstrably true, what scientist would ever agree to that? And more to the point, if that scientist did, what would you think about them? First thing I would think was like, well, that's pretty arrogant. Like, even if it's true, the classy thing to do, the virtuous thing to do is to say, oh, okay, let's pump the brakes. What are we talking about here? There's a lot of greatness in the world. I might be okay, but rather than I'm the Gadfather, here's a video of me doing hacky sack to get 50,000 likes. This has nothing to do with why you're paying attention to me, with why I'm significant in this moment. There's just a bunch of stuff with me that's all just building this and cultivating this vision of me as this like paternal godfather like figure. And again, it's just like, it's to me, it seems the only rational explanation is that it's ego building. Like, in terms of why do you permit that? It's because it feels good. It feels good to your ego. You're okay, I'm not going to say what I was about to say. He does not look like Brad Pitt. I'll say that. Neither do I. Not winning any beauty contests. So that's a safe way to say it. So those of us who do not look like Brad Pitt and are not winning beauty contests, I think might be a little more susceptible to adulation, especially if it comes out of nowhere. I mean, like Gad Saad was just some economics professor. I mean,
business school. Yeah.
So I mean, he was in relative notoriety, just like Peterson a few years ago. So I mean, it's a hell of a trip, and to me, it's a real test of character to have that. And I'm not going to pretend that I would handle it any better, but because I haven't been there, and I don't think you know until you're there. But it's a real test of character to all of a sudden get that wave of adulation and notoriety and attention and respect and all that. And in my opinion, Peterson has handled it way better than Saad, despite the fact that Peterson's burden has been far greater. The adulation and deification efforts he has received. I mean, he could probably be Putin's right-hand man in Russia right now. I mean, nobody knows really who Gad Saad is except through reference to Peterson. So the fact that Peterson has managed to continue to comport himself in a way that I don't find to be arrogant, that I actually find to be pretty humble.
So you don't like arrogant?
No.
You think it's a character flaw?
Well, okay, the first thing that needs to be said about arrogance is that it's kind of difficult to find, because the line between arrogance and confidence, I don't know, it seems to be really subjective to the point of being just utterly biased. I don't know, but again, that's why I was trying to concretize it in terms of like not just generalized arrogance, but if you're in a situation where all of a sudden you are catapulted to stardom in an intellectual sense, like Saad has been, I think if you were a rational person and you had gone to Saad before this happened, and him being so smart, I'm sure he would be able to do this better than I could, but well, let's just do it. And you had gone to him and you had said, in a year's time, you're going to blow up on the internet, and you're going to blow up in a way that you can't really imagine right now. And you're going to have like almost disciples. You're going to have people who really think highly of you, and are willing to really go along with whatever you say. Do you see a danger to yourself in that state? To think that he would think about that condition as a highly intelligent man, deeply versed in the relevant fields, and come to the conclusion that there was no danger to himself emotionally, egotistically, mentally, psychologically, in being catapulted. I mean, he knows the suicide stats on lottery winners, right? Or the bankruptcy stats on lottery winners. And anyone who makes themselves an exception to that kind of psychology just by virtue of knowing about it is usually just signing up to be the next one who gets hit by it. And he would know that too. So again, I give him the benefit. It's kind of like I'm trapping him with his own intelligence. I give him the benefit of the doubt fully for being a lot smarter and more well-versed in me in the relevant fields. But I, with my layman's knowledge and lesser intelligence, can construct this scenario and articulation of arguments as I have that I'm not really hearing any counter to. Like I think it's obvious that in that situation, he would have said, particularly if you didn't make it about him, if you just make it hypothetical, even better, just, person X gets, and then just describe the situation that's about to happen to him and just make it person X and say, what is the psychological risk to person X being in that situation with that fact pattern? First thing he would say is narcissism. First thing. He's far more clever than I. And yet, it happens to him. I bring it up. And I'm Hitler. Okay. To me, it kind of proved something. It proved that just because you're smarter than people doesn't mean that you're going to be right more than them. It just means you're thinking faster. But if your algorithm is crap, you're just getting to a crappy product faster. So I remember reading the stuff that 200 IQ guy they found bouncing in Baltimore, the GQ article wrote.
Yeah, I saw a video. I
found some of his writings, complete crap, utter crap. But no, of course, he can just hide and say, oh, you just don't get it because your IQ's 60 points or whatever lower than mine. And it's like, no, there isn't some IQ threshold where suddenly what you're writing becomes blocked by some mystical, inaccessible barrier that I can't pass unless my frontal lobe processes, like rotates three-dimensional images in my mind space quickly enough to get a number on an IQ test. It's not how it works. And
so
once we all have IA,
I've got a couple of responses. One of them is that, do you think that maybe some people are less susceptible to the possibilities of having, negative psychological repercussions to such a situation where you are, say,
sure.
arrogant?
Oh yeah,
and you do have sycophantic people, right? So first of all, personality characteristics, like one people have a range on their susceptibility to negative emotion.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that came up in a recent podcast between Peterson and Saad was Peterson asked him the question, like, how susceptible are you to negative emotion? And he said, and particularly with regard to other people's opinions. And he said, very low. What other people say doesn't bother me, but I am hard on myself.
Gad
I can be
Saad
hard
said
on
very low.
Yeah, he said that he has a very low susceptibility to negative emotion. Yeah.
You can understand my thoughts on that.
Maybe. Well, if you think that you made him angry, but maybe you didn't.
I could pull up the message. He didn't sound calm.
Okay.
And he was using language that I wouldn't. The entire tone of the message was the kind of thing that I was like, you know, why are, like, I'm a nobody. I literally, I'm just some dude. Why would you get in, like, if you think that I'm just taking the piss, why would you get into the mud with me like that? Why wouldn't you just take the high road? You're somebody, I'm nobody. Why would you even respond at all? The whole thing was just, it was baffling. And now in terms of whether or not, yeah, now obviously results may vary, and there are examples throughout history of people who have amassed amazing amounts of power and sycophantry and all that stuff.
Right. That was my second point, is that
relatively,
it does seem to be fairly common that people who rise into leadership positions tend to have their egos grow and to maybe be arrogant, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's negative psychological consequences for them.
I think that if you were, I think it's not necessarily, but I think, again, would you make yourself the low percentage exception, or would you make yourself the high?
I don't know if it's
likelihood?
low. I mean, to be honest, I mean, I don't know. Like, I've been around a few different industries, you know, and the people who are the managers, the foremen, the leaders, they tend to be arrogant people. I mean,
yeah.
And leadership seems to. This is one of the things Gad Saad harps on a lot, is that we're a hierarchical species, right? Just like all apes. So we tend to have alpha males and leaders, and maybe arrogance is like a natural quality. I mean, they're also supposed to be the most emotionally intelligent.
Oh, arrogance is, I agree with all that. Yeah, no, that's all fine. But I mean, in terms of who can resist the negative consequences that come with that kind of adulation, I don't think it's common to resist it. I mean, you know, you think of all the, like, for example, think of the Roman emperors, right? How many of them resisted it? Marcus Aurelius?
Well, right, not really? A lot, right?
One that immediately springs to mind. How many didn't resist it? Yeah, the rest. I mean, it just, you know, how many Elon Musks are there? One. I haven't seen another CEO who thinks, acts, or speaks like Elon Musk or anything close to it. Not even close. And one of the things that really defines him seems to be, like, he openly encourages a culture that is based around, like, the opposite of sycophantry. It's based, like, he wants disagreeable people. He wants people who are willing to speak up and not go with the status quo, not bow to the alpha, not go along with somebody just because they're being arrogant and they have those attributes that are commonly associated with leadership. It's like, no, don't get fooled by that. What's their actual idea? What's the product? Is the product good? The person's irrelevant. What are they producing? How are they thinking? Rogan talked about that too, how it's like when he interviews, he wants to understand how people think at a fundamental level. That's the most important thing. And Musk has talked about that as well, where he's like, he's not really concerned about your education level or your career history or anything like that. And apparently the job interview questions for some of those Tesla positions are very weird. They're very unusual. But I get that. It's because, like, yeah, he's not testing for arrogance and conformity and status quo and all that sort of thing. He's testing for something a lot rarer, but a lot more useful, which is, no, I want people who are not going to sit on an opinion for any other reason than because they think it's wrong. Not because it's unpopular, not because it, you know, it's going to career limit a CLM, a career limiting move. They don't want to be he doesn't want people who are going to be inhibited by any of that nonsense. It's like, if you have a high functioning brain and you're looking at our plan and you see a problem with it and you think you can prove the problem, then speak up. And And arrogant leaders don't tend to create environments conducive to that. They tend to create environments to the opposite of that, which is go along. Don't speak up. If you speak up, then you're the troublemaker. You're the one who's branded as negative. He's always complaining. He's always complaining about something. And it's,
well, there's no shortage of examples of people throughout history, probably, including in science, that were arrogant and had sycophants. You know, I mean, like back to Sigmund Freud, he was definitely like that, right? And he probably, because of that, he's more remembered than other people that had the same ideas before he even did. You know, he was kind of cutthroat, you know, wanted to be the man, and so he got remembered before like Pierre something or other, who basically had the same ideas.
Yeah, that's not, to me, that's not really an argument for the supremacy of Freud. That's just, that just shows how our history of how science works is not very scientific. I mean, I read Kuhn. I know it.
Yeah, no, I learned that in the history psychology class by a professor who's very concerned with sort of what do you call it, critical history, right? So looking back and seeing how things actually were versus the traditional story that we get. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, well, and I'd love to
just on the topic of Gad Saad though. So besides like that element, which you see as, you know, a negative aspect of his character, something that's not admirable, do you think that there's much that you've seen that displays him being unwilling to field like opposing opinions?
Well, again, it would be more in what's not there than what's there. He's a sophisticated guy. So if he wants to shield himself from critical opinion, he's not going to do it in an obvious way. The most obvious way he's going to do it is simply by who he interacts with. So if you're shielding yourself from critical opinion, then, and I'm saying this with absolutely no knowledge of, I haven't followed Saad for years, so feel free to fact check me on this one. But the prediction I would make is that you will not find Saad in a lot of conversations with people who have significant disagreements with him.
Well, see, I would challenge that. I would
finding him with like Peterson.
I think his whole career is based around criticizing people with very different opinions and actually interacting with them on social media. So I think that's kind of what his career is about. Well, Twitter and his YouTube. So you're right. Maybe he's not directly interviewing people with absolute opposite opinions, but even when he meets with Jordan Peterson, like they recently had a podcast together, and he challenged Peterson, and I'm sure he was open to Peterson challenging him, although Peterson didn't have much to challenge him on. He challenged Peterson about Jung, and I found that a very interesting conversation because
right. But I mean,
you know, he was saying, you know, the thing I disagree with you on, Peterson, is
that's such but nothing's at risk there. Like that's what part of, like, why would he give a crap about his opinion of Jung? Jung isn't really central to what Saad's doing. Jung is more central to what Peterson's doing.
That's true, but he challenged him, and he challenged him harshly, and I'm sure Peterson could have challenged him back if he had much to challenge him on. So the question is, what does Gad Saad say that should be challenged that isn't being challenged?
Not much. I agree with I haven't heard Gad say anything that struck me as just being flat out wrong. I agree with him on pretty much everything. That's why I didn't message him with any kind of criticism of his content. His content to me is all just, you know, I mean, I'm kind of over the whole like bashing leftists and how crazy postmodernism has gotten and all that sort of stuff. Like it needs to be done. It's good work, yada yada. It needs to be done. You know, we need.
It's a big thing. It's a big issue.
It's a big thing, but in my head, I've already moved past it. It's like, well, that's clearly nonsense. We are going to get past it, and I'm trying to figure out the next thing. And it's, I don't know. It's just nothing he says though. I haven't heard it. None of his points of fact, none of his arguments or anything like that have I ever had an issue with. As far as I can tell, it's not. But again, it doesn't really impress me that much. It's not that difficult
No, it's pretty
when you're
basic.
picking your topics to talk about, and
Yeah.
when you have this craziness in the public sphere right now in the form of all these different ideologies, it really is. I mean, it's like kicking a puppy. It's not that difficult. I mean, it's.
But I'm grateful to him for doing it, you know, because he's
Sure,
one of the
needs to get
foremost
done.
people doing it, and he's probably one of the big influences on me understanding, you know, that situation as well as I do.
Everything
So I
he
mean,
does, like I like everything about him except the Godfather stuff, and that's why I reached out to him. That was my only concern, and the concern, I can say what was in my heart. My heart honestly was, my concern was like, I don't like you. I don't like you as much as Peterson, but that's setting a pretty high bar. I had nothing against Saad until I had the conversation with him. My only concern was that I didn't want him to turn into another Stefan Molyneux. It's the last thing I want is more Molly bots out there and more Molyneux, more egomaniacs who who are rational enough to understand that the left has gone temporarily crazy and that they can bash some of these things very easily, and then they ride the coattails of that and hope everyone forgets about the crazy crap they did before, like the defooing and all that stuff, and being the savior of philosophy, you know, self-appointed, of course. So the last thing I wanted was to see Gad Saad go down that route, and it's clear that Molyneux went down that route because of being surrounded by sycophants, being surrounded by people who didn't challenge him. And so when I see Saad, in my mind, falling into that same pattern, even if it's ironically, I'm like, yeah, that's just a cover. You're still getting the ego boost, and it's still going to do the work. And if you think that you're an exception to it, okay, maybe you are, but rational people don't make decisions based on themselves being the exception. Because if we did, we'd all buy lottery tickets. So I don't know, just at a fundamental level, it still doesn't fly with me. And the way he handled my messages and the way he comported himself with me, well, I mean, that was, frankly, I was a bit embarrassed for him. I was like, did I catch you on a bad day? But what I more thought was, no, this is not the kind of message that you're used to getting. This clearly you're used to getting messages of adulation and adoration, and this message came out of the blue, and it was a little bit pokey, and it went after the one thing that I think anyone could realistically go after you for. I don't think he can be gone after on his points of fact. I haven't heard him say anything that I disagree with.
so then don't you think maybe it's I mean, yeah, maybe he reacted poorly to you, but don't you think it's maybe a smaller issue than maybe you think? Like maybe it's just not something that is that big of a deal to him. And then because I'm just imagining like a leader
Didn't
in an
react like
organization.
it wasn't a big deal.
Well, I mean, the thing is that if you were to come up to like a boss, if you were to come up to a boss and then give him that, I mean, he might not respond with the expletives that Gad Saad did, but I mean, he probably wouldn't have a very positive reaction to your criticism.
Probably not. But
right?
do you know what I would think of that boss? I would think exactly the same thing as I think of Gad Saad, because if I was that boss and somebody came up to me with that, my immediate reaction would be anger. But then I wouldn't act on it. I would be like, why am I mad? Oh, because they're suggesting that I'm not perfect. They're suggesting that I'm doing something wrong. Okay, maybe what if they're right? You know, everyone walks around this bloody world saying that they're looking for the truth. And then the truth comes up to you, and you don't like the packaging. You don't like how it looks. There's just something about it. It's just not easy enough to consume or ingest. There's just something, and you brush it out of the way and you say, go away, I'm looking for the truth. And the truth just wanders off confused. And it's just like, you know, you shouldn't expect hard truths to come to you in comfortable packaging. It's nice when they do, you know, when you pay a therapist to give you a hard truth about yourself and they softball it in, it's because they're being paid. But when your enemy, sometimes you don't get truth from your therapist or from your friends. Sometimes you get it from your enemies. And if you get it from your enemy, it's pretty much guaranteed that the packaging is going to be as unpleasant as possible. But it's still going to be, once you get past that, the thing in the center of the bullet is still true. And if you discard that because of the packaging, I'm not gonna call the person a name. I'm just gonna say I wouldn't do that. I don't think that's wise. I think if you're going around the world only looking for truth that's palatable, that doesn't engage any emotion, that doesn't incur any psychic resistance. Who was it, Gloria Steinem, who said that the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off? One of the most psychologically brilliant statements I've ever heard in my life. I reference it constantly. It doesn't mean that all truth is going to piss you off, but most of it is. Like, in my experience, the hard truths, the truths that you don't want to accept and eventually accept, it usually starts with you being wildly pissed off and not wanting to accept it. So it's so, again, to me, the way I've rectified that, rationalized that, is, to me, if somebody comes to me now with criticism of me and I feel that spike of emotion, that spike of anger, of engagement that's not rational, I have it in my head now that that's a sign of premature enlightenment. That is not negative. That's your defenses kicking up. But the reason your defenses are kicking up is because that's touching on something true, and that hurts your ego, and you're defending your ego. And so I don't understand why people who are significantly more sophisticated than me do not guard themselves against that. And that was my worry with Saad. And he told me to go F myself. I was like, okay, well, I guess you're not worried about it. Okay, I hope you're right. I hope you are the exception.
Right. Well, I'm thinking because of his perspective, he's basically, I mean, he's like an evolutionary psychologist, and not, his epistemology is positivism. So everything has to have the scientific basis, and he's an evolutionary psychologist. So
he's an economist, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, if you want to go deeper,
his
thing is that he's an evolutionary psychology economist.
Right. Well, and economy, you can consider the economy a biological product. I mean, determinist, yeah, I do. So yeah. But anyway.
Right. He's explaining economic behavior through an evolutionary lens. That's what he does.
Correct. Yeah.
So
which is awesome.
It is. He's an evolutionary thinker. So, and I'm just wondering if maybe, as an evolutionary thinker who's very much looks at human beings as, having an evolved psychology, which is similar to ape psychology. And so, I mean, I'm not trying to limit what his worldview is, but if you think about, that's his main thing, that's the central thing that he's, that's the science that he's interested in. I'm just wondering if maybe he does look at himself as that alpha male, that leader, and then to have anybody challenge him as the leader, right? He considers that an offense that needs to be responded to accordingly.
That certainly, I mean, that makes sense to me as a good synthesis of his state of mind when he was responding to me. The unfortunate thing is that I wasn't challenging his leadership. I was challenging how he was being that leader. And I directly referenced Peterson as an alternate way of being that leader, of not giving up any of your power or authority. Actually, it actually magnifies it. It's a sophisticated thing.
I think you're right. Let me just say that. I think you're right. I have a lot of admiration for people like Peterson who remain very humble. I think that humility is a virtue. I do. I agree with you there, but I'm just thinking maybe maybe it's not as much of a great sin as you
Well,
as
I
you're
haven't
thinking.
like written them
'Cause
off. Like I don't like
yeah.
I don't discount anything that he has said on the topics that he speaks because of how he treated me in our Facebook conversation. Like they're completely separate. But
Right.
but in
Because
terms of how I
we've
view him
already
as a
agreed
person,
though. Yeah, we've already agreed that that's common for leaders, right? That's common for people who are leaders. It's common for them to be arrogant, and
I would say it's natural. Yeah.
it's natural.
I would go as far as to say it's natural. Yeah.
Then
There's
again,
a selection mechanism, and yeah.
Right. So is it not forgivable that he's that way, even though you can see a more admirable way?
Well, it's forgivable.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything's forgivable, to me, what more was less forgivable was how he reacted. The question I thought was fairly innocuous. Well, maybe not innocuous. I had a feeling that he would not have been asked that question before. I understood that I was probably going to be presenting him with something that if he engaged it, I didn't even think he'd read the message, to be honest, but I did anticipate that it might get under his skin.
That's another thing he talked about on that. Yeah.
That nobody else is being like me. I assumed that everyone else around him is being sycophantic and is lobbing him softballs, and I did not lob him a softball, to put it mildly. And it was just kind of like it, and like Peterson says when he talks about his own fans, like with Kermit the Frog meme and stuff like that, where he's like, it's not really complimentary. It's a bit pokey. It's like, hey, can you take a joke? Can you take this? Like, how about if I'm not sucking up? How about if I'm poking you a little bit, putting a little pressure on you, taking you out of that little pedestal world that you're normally on? How about if you're not the Gadfather with me? How about if with me you're just Gad Saad, and I'm questioning the actual act of you being the Gadfather? I'm not trying to dispute in any way, shape, or form that you're more significant than me, more an alpha than me. I'm not trying to take over leadership or whatever. You're infinitely smarter, better, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, none of that has anything to do with my criticism. If my criticism is valid, it's valid regardless of the differences between you or I. And is it valid? I mean, I think if we took away his name and replaced it with just person X and just made it, double blind, I think we would all agree that normally anybody who reacts to a question like that the way he did, you would draw some negative conclusions about them. I mean, hot-headed. The biggest one that always got me was, why bother responding?
Well, because what I was going to say is that he
mentions, if you're just going to insult me and then block me, why bother? Why just block?
He does talk about blocking people, which is funny for a guy.
If he told Rogan,
that's funny for a guy that's very much against cancel culture.
Oh, yeah, everyone who's against it.
He jokes about blocking people that he jokes about blocking people that he disagrees with their opinions,
and you said that he told Rogan that he does not have a strong emotion.
No, that was Peterson. A recent interview with Peterson.
Oh, okay, but he told Peterson that he Gad Saad does not have strong emotional responses to negative, like to criticism.
Yeah, from other people, right?
Okay.
Like he's not prone to negative emotion on a personality.
I wouldn't make that call for myself. And I'm skeptical of people. That's kind of like somebody saying, I'm not an asshole. And it's like, well, I don't think it's really up to you. I think it's kind of up to other people. I think it's kind of the same way with that. I mean,
well, maybe, but I mean, like,
I don't think he gets to say that. I don't think he can say whatever he wants and thinks. That's his self-conception. But how accurate are people's self-conceptions?
And so I'm wondering, because the trait is called neuroticism, and that's how prone to negative emotion you are. And I don't know how much that applies to like immediate anger responses. I think it's more to do with with like your propensity to depression, to sadness, to mulling over things and being in anxiety and things like that.
Right.
So the idea is, does an interaction make you suffer for the next couple days, as opposed to you just have a negative reaction to somebody and quickly snap back with an angry comment?
Oh, well, yeah, because he definitely, yeah, it didn't take him long to resolve it. He snapped back and blocked me pretty quick. So yeah, he definitely doesn't suffer for days. No, he's not that way. I thought he was trying to imply that he doesn't have immediate hostile negative reactions to personal criticism. And I'm like,
no,
yes,
trait neuroticism.
yes, you do.
Yeah.
I have the proof on my Facebook. You bloody well do. At least with me, I've got one counterexample for sure. I mean, don't even and it was because, you know, we weren't on YouTube. Nobody else was watching this. What do you do when the lights are off, when the cameras aren't watching? What do you do when you're alone, Gad Saad? Well, I sent you a personal message, and when you and I were alone, you were a real jerk. So, I mean, you know, anyone can hold it together for like an hour. Gad Saad's pretty good. And I mean, you know, Gad Saad couldn't be who he is if he was some hothead who went off at any criticism. I mean, he couldn't be where he is if he was that neurotic and that touchy. So there's just no way. So he can't be that person in like through and through, and he's just hiding it. And there, I don't know. It's maybe I just accidentally really.
Well, what I'm wondering is if it's more like, if it's more,
maybe he had thought of it too. Maybe he was worrying about it too and had dismissed it or something. I don't know.
No, that's definitely a possibility. It's definitely a possibility that you touched a nerve because you said something true and it upset him. But it might also be related to just that that natural sort of, you know, human psychology where we have a hierarchical, you know, organization, and then so that you imagine someone of a lower rank comes and says something out of place, the natural response is to put them in their place.
I didn't lead with a compliment. I didn't, you know, long time viewer, first time messenger, and none of that crap. I just went right into it. So I didn't sugarcoat it. I mean, I wanted the best for him, but at the same time, a part of me was pokey. A part of me was like, you should be able to handle this. You have
Jordan Peterson
more than sufficient resources to handle this. I mean,
so I listened to Jordan Peterson's most recent audiobook for his Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life.
Right.
And in that, he tells the story of when he was working, I don't know, it was some kind of construction related job, right? And he was talking about in Alberta, and just the mentality of that, and how, like, basically the people at the bottom of the organization are bullied. When you first come in, you're bullied, and you are
I know this story. So and the hard hat plunking rocks off the dude. And
exactly. And then and then that guy leaves. He's gone. Right. And then so Peterson, they first called him Kermit, right? I think
that's right.
And that was a very, you know, negative type thing. And then they changed his name. They changed his nickname to something else, which was an improvement, right? So he said there's this mentality where
first he was howdy doody on the rail yard. He was howdy doody to start because on the rail crew, because he was like a country guy, and then it got shortened to howdy.
I think that was an improvement. I think that was an improvement from Kermit.
No. Kermit
is negative.
No, Kermit is his, you know, howdy doody was the negative, because howdy doody's not like howdy doody's kind of a dork, and then it got shortened to howdy. Which
right.
Howdy is cool. The Kermit thing is from his resurgence in the internet and Pepe and all that.
Yeah, and he was saying, like, there's a mentality like, you better keep your head down, you better do your work, you better, you know, all of that. And then so obviously there's like the social hierarchy that comes along with that, because I've been in, you know, I've worked construction, and so the foreman, you know, the foreman is a leader, and he like, you know, they tend to be arrogant. They tend to have an attitude. And so, and if somebody from that company were to come up and just straight criticize, and he was also talking about how they joke around together, right? And they joke around and they're insulting each other with a joke, but it better be a joke, because if there's any like actual sort of attack in what you're saying, if it's not a joke, that is not acceptable.
It's called kidding on the square.
Yeah.
Kidding on the square, which is the joke that's, It's not a joke. It's using the template and the social context of telling a joke to slap somebody in the face. It's
Yeah, so that'll
it's not
that'll
cool.
put you right out of place. That's not
Yeah.
socially acceptable in that
No.
environment, right? So I'm wondering if like it was maybe like him being a leader and feeling like somebody had stepped out of place and offended him.
If that's his conception of himself, then all that's doing is making me more worried about him just ending up as a bloody narcissist and another Molyneux. I mean, again, to what I was saying earlier, you know, if you take two leaders and you have one leader who will only accept personal criticism if it's couched within a context that appeases his alpha
Or
sensibilities.
if it's somebody who has earned his respect, if it's somebody who is in the right, you know, position to say it.
Sure, but again, I'm talking about like if you just look at two leaders, one who will accept criticism from any source and simply evaluates the criticism based on its merits and isn't going to reject criticism simply because of its source. And you have another leader who is willing to reject criticism because of its source, because of its packaging, because it doesn't kowtow to the expectations he has within the social context of being an alpha. The leader who is more open to criticism is going to be wiser in the long term, just as a matter of
I agree, but I think that's also very rare. Right?
Yeah,
That's
but
like
just
as rare as
but it's
enlightenment.
but just because it's rare doesn't mean that we shouldn't be striving for it or that we should accept less because it's more common, right? Like it's clearly more effective as a leader to be open to truth coming to you in any form, in any context, and having the sophistication to isolate your own emotional reactions and your own ego and simply be able to look at it as data, as opposed to a leader who emotionally reacts to truth. And so if the truth is not packaged in such a way that it doesn't provoke a negative emotion in them, they won't accept it. I mean, again, it's like you're looking for accurate data, but you're looking for truth and you're rejecting it because it's not coming to you in a way that you feel is appropriate to your age and station as an alpha. You can do that if you want to. Freedom, do whatever you want. But you asked me, do I think that's good? No. Is it common? Yes. Is it rare to have better than that? Yeah, it is rare. Is it better to have better than that? Yeah, it's better. So should we try for the better? Yeah, we should try for the better, and we shouldn't be satisfied with the mediocre and that crappiness going around. And we should hold each other accountable to it. And you should want to be held accountable to it. And it sucks. It's the worst thing, but you eventually get to a point where, again, like I said, you can train yourself where you start to feel your emotion kicking in and your ego kicking, you're getting defensive, you don't like what's being said. You can literally train yourself to invert that in your head as, oh, I'm about to learn something. Something's got me defensive.
Did he publicly respond to you?
No, it was private.
Okay.
Yeah, it was private. No, I didn't try and shame him. I didn't try and pick a fight on his wall or something like that. I was pretty sure well, I don't want to say I was pretty sure because I don't know the guy, but I had a hunch. I had a feeling because again, it was just like when you ingest him and when you ingest Peterson, especially side by side, it was just so stark to me, the difference. And especially,
well, that is, but it's a difference in character, right? And you may,
yeah,
you may prefer Peterson's character over Gad Saad's, and
but I think it's more effective too. I don't think it's some arbitrary subjective preference. I think Peterson's character is better. It's just better. It's better to be open, not only open to criticism, but to actively encourage it, to seek it. To seek that criticism is better than to inoculate yourself against it by surrounding yourself with sycophants.
So I think, like, the way when I think of Gad Saad and his worldview and what he is out there, you know, the knowledge that he's out there purveying, I I
It's all
don't
good.
see that. What I'm also saying is that I don't see like your the values that you're judging him by. I don't see him as having those values, and so you could judge that as a negative thing. But you know, I mean, like I just think that his I just think he's got a lot of value, you know, to share and a lot of value to put out. And there may be things that you don't like about his character, and that's okay. But I just don't see it as being such a, you know, such a problematic thing the way
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't affect his message. I mean, there's nothing about. Yeah, nothing about my interaction with him changes what I think about him as somebody who's in the vanguard, you know, for this countering all this crazy leftist postmodern nonsense. I mean, he's doing great work. He's doing far better work than I'll ever do. So I don't. It's not like because of that one thing, it's all off. You know. Oh yeah, no.
And I think
crap. But it's like all of his products are great, but I think he's kind of an egotistical dink in much the same way that Isaac Newton was, I mean, arguably one of the most intelligent men to ever exist. Also a notorious, insert bad word, crank. We'll just call him a crank. Notorious. Everyone hated him. I mean,
well, there's a difference between him and Gad Saad, because a lot of people like Gad Saad.
A lot of people do like Gad Saad. And again, there's nothing wrong with Gad Saad in terms of who he is, his public persona, and all that. He's doing good work. It's all great. I think
it's fine. It's fine if you don't like his, like, that element of his character. I think that's fine, and I think you're entitled to that.
That's all it is. I would never tell somebody don't listen to Gad Saad talk about one of his areas of expertise because I had a bad interaction with him on Facebook. Like, it hasn't colored any of my opinions about any of his product. All of his product, his intellectual product that I'm aware of, is all top notch, first rate. I have no argument against it. It hasn't changed.
Yeah, and I think he's intellectually honest, and I think maybe, you know, if you look carefully, you might even see humility in
he'll be
his
humble
words
sometimes,
and in him. But at the same time, you're not the first person to say that he has an ego.
And again, I do this thing where I kind of hang people with their own sophistication, right? It's like, he has a bit of an ego. And how smart is this guy? Oh, he's real smart. How self-aware is he? He's probably pretty self-aware. So,
so I think the way I look at it is,
do you think he's openly mitigating it?
No, but I think he does. I think he doesn't think he should. I think he thinks that his ego is a strength. It's a virtue, and that's just his perspective.
A certain amount of it certainly is. He is a leader, by virtue of the fact that he is, and he has natural alpha leadership qualities, all that sort of thing. So yeah, that's all fine, but I mean, it still doesn't address anything that I've said. You know what I mean? Like, nothing, all the stuff I've been talking tonight, it doesn't address any of that. And it's just a pity. It was just a moment where it's like, it's too bad. That's too bad that you have that in you, and that you're so sophisticated that if you were stupid, I would think that what I'm seeing is what I'm getting, and that you're not capable of hiding anything. But you're not stupid. You're smarter than me. So, I mean, I'm capable of hiding lots, even over multi-hour conversations. What are you capable of hiding of? Like, you must know this stuff is bad. Is this just you keeping a lid on it?
You keep saying that, but I don't think that. I think it's completely congruous with his worldview. I think I'm going to put words in his mouth and say he's an atheist, because I've never heard him say that. But I think
I would assume, yeah.
Well, for sure. And then you see someone like Peterson who has that humility that you love so much, and Peterson's not an atheist. I mean, yeah, he's not an atheist.
No, he's a Christian. He's just
he's not. Cute. debatable, right?
Didn't he? Well, has he accepted Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior yet?
No.
Okay,
no.
well then he's not a Christian. I mean,
There you go. But he's deeply respectful of the tradition and thinks that there's deep psychological knowledge. And yes. I think you might have mentioned something about this, or maybe it was someone else, but about Christ. His conception of Christ is somebody who he thinks of like the religious ideal of God being like the ultimate ideal, and he thinks of Christ as the living out of an ultimate ideal. And so Christ is that figure who lived out an ultimate ideal.
He was perfect.
And so that's
he didn't make any mistakes in his existence on earth. He reached his absolute.
That's what he thinks of Christ. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That is 100% potential human right there.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, which I agree. And I mean, Peterson was the first to make me realize I'd never even thought about it, especially in my angry atheist days. You know, like I don't want to say every, but like a lot of angry atheists, you reject religion it becomes really toxic, and anything that's even remotely associated with it, you start to just toss out the window. And it's pretty easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and pretty easy to throw out these foundational institutions of our civilization and then wonder why suddenly things are a bit unstable. And it's like, oh well, we didn't really replace them with anything. We didn't replace the old myths with new myths of meaning.
And that's the other interesting thing. He thinks that humans somehow have a religious program, and it's deep. It's somehow in us, in our biology. And this is what he thinks. It could be wrong, but he thinks we have a religious program, and that and you know, maybe it's related to tribalism and things like that, right? So that
word program is giving me fits, like predilection.
Okay. That's the word that's hotly contested, of course, in psychology, right?
Yeah.
But the idea is he thinks that we have a framework, a religious framework, and ideologies prey on it. So when you take religion out of that framework, you get things like the new woke, anti-racism and the gender studies types and all that. That's what you get. That's religious, hugely religious, right?
Yeah. What's it? Peter Boghossian and
Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay.
Yeah, they've literally articulated it, broken it down. Here's all the attributes of a conventional religion. Here's all the attributes of this woke ideology. Hey, look, the template fits. It's perfect. Yeah, no.
Right, because like Nietzsche predicted was going to happen, God died. And so they put, they put like Marxism in its place. And Nietzsche predicted that. And Nietzsche predicted the deaths of millions of people, and it happened, and etc. So, and Nazism as well.
Yeah, and and there's still this strange resistance to us making, like, either reconceptualizing old myths into a new context to breathe life into them, or just flat out writing new narratives that are exciting, that are congruent with our ancient biological programming, but are also modernized, that take into account the modern environment that we're in.
And Peterson says it's so dangerous to try and rewrite them, like to rewrite them with our intellect, with our minds, and then so
change
we get
them.
He's saying that it's extremely ignorant to do that, to throw away the traditional stories, because the new ones that we create are weak, are terribly like inaccurate. And so when we have such an inaccurate map of the world, and then we go and we try and live that out, when we try and force the world into that.
That's him being a staunch that's him being a staunch old traditionalist. And
he's not saying things don't change either, but he's saying definitely
he's saying don't try and write new narratives, because you'll probably get it wrong. Let's stick to the old ones that we know work. That's very pessimistic.
Yeah,
and that's also a bit postmodern. That's like believing that you can't create good new things, that it's all been done, and that all we have now rehashing.
This is really interesting.
To me, that strikes me as postmodern. Like, and that's not.
Okay, hold on. Yeah. So like the evolution of the narrative story, right? He's saying so first of all, he talks about order and chaos, right?
Right.
He talks about how conservatives, they're more concerned with order, and then liberals, artistic types and everything.
Creatives.
They're more interested in creatives, are more interested in going out into the chaos. So
That's
he's
right.
saying both are necessary, both
Yes.
are perfectly natural. And then the story does change and evolve. That's another, another element. It's a dead thing, right? But you have to revive it and bring new life into it. And the people who do that are the artistic types and the liberals. They initiate change and everything. But he says, and the conservatives, they're trying to keep alive the tradition. But he's saying it's a huge balancing act because you need both. If you forget the tradition, if you completely deny that and try to create something entirely new, then you run into problems. It's like there's mapped territory. Tradition is mapped territory, but the territory changes. The territory is not static, right?
Yeah.
So you have to continuously brave the unknown, map the new territory, et cetera, and
and you need
reconfigure your map.
You need those old patterns, because you're gonna be using those archetypes, like that book Save the Cat, where you can literally break down most movies that are made now, you can break it down using Save the Cat by the minute to where the certain story beats are going to happen. And that's all natural. Oh God, that takes me into that. I get in trouble because one of my favorite things to yell at people is when people say like, oh, taste is subjective. Like, no, it very isn't. No, trust me, psychology. That's why people are afraid of psychology. Psychology is damn close to proving that taste is not subjective.
Right, and
it's arbitrary. It's arbitrary, but it's not subjective. Yeah, like people mistake subjective and arbitrary. It is arbitrary, but it's not subjective. No way.
Those are people who don't read the literature. Those are non-scientific thinkers.
And they're always hiding. It always comes out at the same point. I used to have terrible taste, very unsophisticated taste in like music in particular. And then I went out with a bunch of hipster chicks from Commercial Drive, and they were awful, but they had great taste in music. And I, at that time, was sophisticated enough where, despite the fact that they were being very condescending in their presentation of their superior taste to me, I was able to just get through that and control my emotions and just take their recommendations, because I was able to realize, like, well, besides all your condescension and arrogance, no, your taste is more sophisticated than me. You have uncovered a bunch of things about music that I didn't even know existed, that I didn't even know I would like until you showed me. But as soon as you showed me, I was like, oh crap, okay. And that's the proof. And
I took you literally when you said taste. I thought you were talking about taste sensation, physical taste.
Oh yeah, I know.
No, for sure. And that's an interesting thing because I've gotten into cigars recently and these things. So it's interesting to taste in cigars. You can become more aware of the elements of something, and I'm sure it's the same with music and everything else. There's subtle, there's subtlety to it.
And yet anytime you point that out to somebody who doesn't have good taste, the thing they immediately say 100% of the time is, oh, taste is subjective. The dumbest person knows that phrase. Taste is subjective. And it's so easy to say that, and it takes so much time to unpack it and show that it's not. You basically have to educate them in a bunch of things. And it's just, I was able to accept that I had unsophisticated taste compared to the people I was countering, and I was able to accept their data, despite the fact that they were presenting it to me in about the way a stereotypical Commercial Drive hipster chick would present it to somebody who only liked metal at the time. So complete disdain and utter disgust. I was still able to get through that packaging and realize that no, you do have more sophisticated taste than I do. That is a measurable thing, and you just proved it to me. Okay. Throw it at me. Give me the condescension too. I don't care. I can rip that off. Just give me the tunes. And I wish more people would kind of get on board with that, where it's like admitting that you have unsophisticated tastes is not an admission. It's the start of a journey. It's the journey to having more sophisticated taste, which is better. Like the idea that it is better by any rational analysis. Yeah, no, it's better. It's better.
Yeah.
So just do it. You're not going to fumble your way into it. You have to admit, first of all, that your taste is not perfect. You have to admit that taste is not all subjective, because if it is all subjective, the very notion of having more or less sophisticated taste is a non sequitur. It's nonsensical. So just right away, you have to admit that it's not subjective, that there is such a thing as good taste, and that there is such a thing as sophistication. And as soon as you admit that, well, you're on your way. But most people won't admit it. It's too comforting to just be able, rather than doing all the work, both inner and outer, of developing your taste. It's a lot easier to just it's all subjective. Good enough.
Right.
I keep listening to Backstreet Boys and thinking that that is the ultimate expression of music by human beings, and yeah, that's better. No, says nobody ever. But they don't. But they're not willing to put in the work, and mostly they're not willing to subdue their own ego. They're not willing to accept that, you know, there isn't really a way to present to a person that their tastes are bad that isn't going to engage their ego negatively. So until they're ready to make that decision, they're just going to sit there with awful taste. And now, because everyone's so touchy-feely and everyone's afraid of confronting and having arguments and discussions, I mean, the inevitable result is what you see now, idiocracy, like you said earlier. I mean, we're pretty darn close to farmers pouring Mountain Dew on their crops. I mean, we're we're really close to, I mean, when you look at public debate, like at the highest levels of office, at the most, where the consequences of those debates determine the placing of people in the most important positions of power. And they're not even debates. They're each allowed to talk for like, what, 2 minutes about a subject that you would probably need to talk for 2 months about to do any kind of justice. And we're just all supposed to, yeah, it all just gets boiled down to the simplest common denominator. And everyone's afraid to point that out, because then they sound like an asshole.
Oh, but they're not now. That's what I love so much, is the whole, like, the fact that nobody's just watching the debates except for very old people. Everybody is watching them through the lenses of long form podcasts and new media. Yeah. So that's beautiful. I love it. We're having
not everyone, the smart people. The smart people, the people who have, there's a natural selection mechanism at work with the 3-hour podcast. And it is, of course, the ability to maintain your focus and attention span for 3 hours on one thing, which, well, if it's a Lord of the Rings movie, if it's a Marvel movie where stuff's exploding and there's boobs everywhere every 5 seconds, that's, you know, keeping your lizard brain happy. If it's just grossly manipulating your emotions at the most basic fundamental level, but people just seem to be satisfied with that. And it's like, there's better than that, right? Like,
well, Peterson thinks that like, the movies that are compelling, the movies that we know are good when we watch them, are the ones that are in accord with real archetypal stories that are meaningful to human beings.
Sure, but nothing about that. I would agree with that, but nothing about that it makes necessary that the product is unsophisticated. Nothing. I think we're just used to think, because we think of them as these simplistic archetypes, that we think that if we're going to use that pattern in a story, it's going to be simplistic. And I think there's nothing about that that's true. So like so consider this as an example. So the second Alien movie, Aliens, one of my all-time
favorites.
Yes, I consider it the greatest feminist movie ever. And the story is so archetypal, it hurts. And yet most people don't realize it. The story is of a mother who loses her family and then makes another family and protects it. That's the story. She wakes up from hypersleep, and her first thing she learns, Ripley, is that her daughter, that she's been in hypersleep for 60 plus years, and her daughter has grown up, lived a life, and died. We never hear about Ripley's husband or partner or whatever, so he's not in the picture. He'd be dead too. Everyone she knows is dead. So her circle that is so important to her, so the women want to be at the center of, that they build, gone. And what does she do for the rest of the movie? It's the classic story of a busy woman multitasking, right. Because not only is she confronting her fears through vulnerability by making herself vulnerable, which is a uniquely female thing, such power in that. I can't, I'm just starting to unpack that in my head. She rescues Newt, her new daughter. And so she's building a relationship with Newt, being a mother figure to Newt. She's building a relationship with Hicks. She's got her new partner sourced out. Hicks looks great. She's sussing him out. And then she's doing all the stuff of the plot. And the movie literally ends with Newt calls her mommy at the end of the movie when she hugs her. Like,
James Cameron, what a genius.
Can you make it more obvious? And of course, the center point of the movie is literally a conflict between two mothers. It's the alien queen and Ripley, and that's where it gets really frightening if you want to get into the fun stuff, where the psychology of it, because how would mothers attack each other? They're empathic, right? Because women are the more empathic, allegedly. I have questions there, but we assume they're empathic.
Definitely true. They are. They're more empathic than males.
I think they're more.
It has to do with.
I think they're more capable.
The thickness of the what's the center region of the brain? Callosum, yes.
Yeah, the connecting hemisphere. The thing that connects the hemisphere is the corpus callosum, and they say if you have a thicker corpus callosum,
you're less empathic. And that's
is that what it is? So I thought it was more. But
corpus callosum is mainly inhibitory, right? And the right hemisphere is where emotion is, and the left hemisphere is where reason and like directed activity and categorization and the rational mind is mainly in the left. And of course, that's a generalization. Both hemispheres have both.
Of course. Yeah. Anyways, it's like the thing that struck me to me was like especially that ending scene where they actually communicate with each other. The two mothers communicate with each other. Ripley points her flamethrower. She shoots it up in the air as a warning shot, points it at the eggs, and then looks at the queen. And then the queen looks at her two subordinates who back off. Well, it's clear communication, but it's also disturbing because Ripley's a mother. So what she's doing here is she's using her empathy of what it is to be a mother. Her enemy is a mother too. So she's figuring out, what do you value most as a mother? What do I value most as a mother? I'm going to use that because it's going to be what it is for you too. Even though you're an alien, doesn't matter. It's going to be your kids. So I'm going to threaten your kids to get you to do what I want. And it works. And then the rest of the movie is Ripley. When Ripley like loses her cool when the egg opens and she does that classic head cocking thing and just starts spraying. If you notice, first thing she does, she torches the eggs and then she blows up the big ovipositor egg sac thing. She doesn't even shoot at the queen. She's like, I'm killing all your kids and I'm killing the thing that makes you a mother so that you can't make more kids. And I'm doing it all right in front of you because that's how much I freaking hate you in this moment. And it's like, no man would do that. A man would just shoot the thing in the face and leave. But it just like, it's just the realization that came to me when it was like, oh my God, she was torturing that thing because that's how much she hated. A man would have just shot a grenade in its face, wouldn't have even looked at the eggs, wouldn't have cared about the egg sac or the ovipositor, none of that. Why did she do that? I know why she did it. Because I can empathize with mother. So could she, because she's like, I want to make you suffer as much as possible. And I'm going to just strip everything away from you that makes you a mother. And that was all in the movie.
How like that is so compelling to everyone, even though most people can't articulate it the way you can. Like that was an incredible analysis.
But they know, it's in there. It's resonating, even though they can't articulate it. It's hitting. And I would agree with Peterson. It's hitting because it's hitting those ancient notes. The protective mother figure is basically the entire movie, which we all know that mothers are sweet and lovely unless they're young or threatened, in which case they become almost nightmarish. And the entire Alien franchise is built around male, like the psychology of it really is male discomfort with the female reproductive system and reproduction and female reproduction in general. I mean, that was literally what Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett were talking about when they wrote the initial screenplay for Alien. You know, they got Giger as the artist, who's a Freudian inspired Mad Dutchman. Yeah, that wasn't accidental either. The fact that the alien is so Freudian and that it terrifies us that much, like irrationally so. Yeah, no, that's not accident. It's actually, it's rationally irrational, if that's a thing. Like, no, it's predictable at least. Yeah, no, it's, I mean, it introduced men to the feeling of rape in a way that they had never, ever even conceptualized. And most men do not think to this day of the Alien movies as being about male, the uncomfortability of male rape, but that's absolutely one of the things that makes it work. Absolutely. Men are not used to being the thing that gets forcibly impregnated against their will. That's women. And so when you do it to men, I mean, well, there were mostly men, if memory serves, the reports of people crawling, vomiting out of the theaters from the first Alien movie, it's all men. It's all men. It wasn't women. It's just, yeah, because it's playing. But see, to me, that's like,
man.
you can play with those ancient archetypes in a way that's new and exciting and sophisticating.
Well, that's what a good artist does, right? Like,
Yes.
you have to be exploring the unknown territory. Of course, if you're an artist, you probably know a tremendous amount. You probably know a tremendous amount about human psychology. You have to. And then you take
even if you can't
further.
articulate it. Yeah.
Yeah, and you articulate it in pictures and symbols
That's right.
and action, right? So that's so incredible. And
if you're
a good artist,
a good artist
does that.
The bad artist doesn't. They just do it in a way that means it to them.
Thing and regurgitates it, you know, without bringing it to life with new knowledge.
Or they just do it in such a way where it only has, like poetry in particular is infamous for this, where poets will write self-referential poetry that's deeply meaningful to them, but it's just meaningless gobbledygook to anyone else, because they haven't constructed it in that way that it needs to be in order to be good poetry, where it can actually transfer that data in some way to someone else. I mean, that's always the challenge is you have, like Cormac McCarthy said, you have this thing in your head, this perfect thing, and then the struggle is always trying to get that out and onto the page and make it be on the page what it is in your head. And of course you never get it right, and that's the struggle. But that's
the way I was looking at it is a bad artist is not, like, I was thinking, if you're a poet and if you can touch things within yourself and bring them into imagery and everything else, it doesn't matter like what the imagery is, because it was formed by those, you know, those archetypal, those deep human realities, then it will touch everybody the same way. And then the bad artist is not really touching those realities. You're like bad art, bad movies, bad music, bad poetry, I would think would be more like a poet who is just trying to put things together without realizing that it needs to touch something deep in order for people to connect with it.
Well, yeah, and the reason that the language is all so vague, just when you're talking about when we're trying to describe that analysis, I guess, is because the inherent subjectivity of art has been taken as fact for so long. The only time I'm aware of where it wasn't the case was the New Criticism movement, which I'm still a part of. As soon as I read the New Critical Theory, I was like, oh, why aren't we doing that? That's clearly correct, but why aren't we doing that? Art is a good, like, quality exists. Art is not subjective. So therefore, it should be possible to identify the attributes, to isolate and identify the attributes, patterns, whatever you want to call it, that make up quote unquote good art. And by its inverse, or by its lack, bad art. There's nothing about that should be an impossible project, and yet no one's doing it. New Criticism kind of fizzled out in the 50s.
What is New Criticism?
It was a school of literary criticism I think T.S. Eliot was a new critic. It really prided itself on like the close reading. If you do a close reading, you're being a new critic. The new criticism school believed that the art is separate from the artist, that the art exists alone, and that you only look at the art, and that you then, and they believed in objective quality. They believed that good art exists and that it is definable. So, and they were starting to break it down, talking about irony, of course, just basically defining what we mean by, for example, sophisticated writing. What do we mean by that? Well, you can break it down and actually, so what do we mean by good art? If you accept that it is not subjective, that it's just arbitrary, if you accept that, then you're a new critic and you can start doing it. But postmodernism came after that. And
wait,
to
so
a
what's arbitrary?
postmodernist,
What's arbitrary? So you said if you accept that things are arbitrary, then you're a new critic?
okay, yeah, I should probably explain what I mean by that. So like, so when we say that a rainbow is beautiful, most people think that rainbows are beautiful. So at some fundamental level, we're gonna find eventually, because I think I am determinist, and once psychology and neural stuff advances, we're going to find that the reason that we think, like we're gonna find the programming or the stuff in our head that makes us feel that that arrangement of light passing through water molecules
Is beautiful
and hitting is beautiful. So that fact is arbitrary. That's not based on, I mean, it's based on our evolution, but that's arbitrary. That's not based, there isn't anything in the universe that you can point to that it's just going to be equality. So it's arbitrary, but it's not subjective, because because we can all see it.
Right.
The same. There's a consistency to how we view it. And people, in my opinion, are mixing up. They're mixing up those two things. There isn't some innate reason in the universe that a rainbow is beautiful. The reason it's beautiful is going to be simply due to the arrangement of molecules and our history as a species from the Big Bang, like everything else. Right. So, but now that we accept that it is arbitrary, we do all actually have patterns that we all agree more or less that when they are present in art indicate quality, and that the lack of those patterns indicate a lack of quality. So people seem to be getting stuck on the fact that those signifiers aren't like just built into the universe somehow, or that God said them. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
Who cares? Let's just focus on finding what good art is and making more of it and less bad art. Like, why is that not like, why is that controversial? Why is that not a worthy goal? Right. But like in a rational, like, well, I don't want to say rational, but in a more systematic, in a way that where we aren't hamstringing ourselves by throwing our hands up in the air anytime things get difficult and saying, well, it's all subjective. Well, if it's all subjective, then why are you even going to art school? If it's all subjective, then why are some paintings insured for 45 million and some paintings are insured for 45 cents? Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Right. And they'll have mixed up ideas about that. They'll say that, well, they shouldn't be, and bad art is good art. And they'll say, you know, people shouldn't need training. I hear this ridiculous amount of the time.
Yeah, and how satisfying are those answers? Bad, they're not. Terrible. Yeah, they don't satisfy anyone.
No.
They only satisfy the people who are beholden to the larger ideologies that's nested in. Right. And they're only beholden because of that reason, because they're all in. It's not for any reasoning that you could separate from that in a vacuum and it would make sense. So I can't really, the subjectivity of art is one that just, I remember having arguments with postmodernists in college about that. And I was baffled at the things they were saying. It made, because they weren't extrapolating from their ideas even forward one step, like, okay, if that is true, then this. If all art is subjective, then there is no such thing as quality. So why do we edit each other's poetry? If there's no such thing as quality, why are we editing each other's poetry? You're not going to make it any better. Better doesn't exist. It's all subjective. Nothing we do as artists makes even irrational rational sense. Like nothing. Then there's no difference between the monkey at the typewriter and Shakespeare.
That's why ideologues don't make good art. They just make propaganda.
Yeah, and they don't convince anyone except through force. They don't convince through their arguments. They convince through other means. But yeah, I mean, there's just another one. And to take it back to like what Peterson, I see a connection there too, where it's like art is arbitrary, but it's not subjective. Okay, well that's good, because that, I think, that will make marrying the rational and the rational and the irrational, or reconciling them easier if we can find bits of both in each. I mean, how is that not good? It's almost like they're, I mean, I know that a lot of artists are, because they've expressed it, are deeply afraid of science like ruining art and ruining romance and all that sort of thing. The fact that that's still a fear astonishes me, because that was a fear hundreds of years ago. There were artists who were afraid that Newton's prism was going to ruin the rainbow. Well, it didn't. If you've seen that double rainbow video, that guy was still pretty blown away by the rainbow. It only adds to our appreciation. It doesn't take away.
Absolutely. And I think like that's part of the reason Jordan Peterson's so compelling to a lot of people who are atheists, right? And then he gets a lot of people telling him, yo, your biblical theory turned me into a Christian atheist.
Right, I know, right? Where people are, where people are doing this weird, but that makes sense to me, because they're not doing some weird compartmentalization thing, like a New Earth creationist who works at a nuclear plant, where he literally has to compartmentalize it.
No,
it's like,
they're
understanding,
combining them.
No, it's like, for them, it's actually congruent, because they're just basically what they're just being is what I just consider modern sophisticated Christians, where they don't literally personalize God into a guy with a long beard. They don't treat the Genesis stories as a literal scientific descriptive explanation of the formation of the universe. They understand it at a sophisticated level as the product, parables, product of Bronze Age people, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I don't think there's anything, but they've realized that, like I was saying earlier, a thing you're in danger of doing, both as a secular society and as an atheist, as an individual, is throwing that baby out with the bathwater, is saying, oh, all religion is garbage, so get rid of all of it, all the parables.
That's reactionary, and that's perfectly natural and understandable, expected, really.
Yeah, but it's the wrong move. It's what we did as a society.
It was a step. Yeah.
And there wasn't another way. We weren't going to be able to take it calmly. We're not very good at that. We just kind of, we got the tiger by the tail, and we're just going with it, which I'm convinced is the right thing to do. We can't slow down. That's why all these, some of these traditionalists and conservatives who are like, oh, we gotta go back. As soon as I hear people talking about that, no, we're not going back. We're
advancing at an incredible rate.
And we're not going to slow down either. And anyone suggesting that we should. And not only is it, what I'm saying is, not only is it accelerating, but it's good that it's accelerating. It needs to. That's the way it has to be. We have to get off this bloody planet. We have to escape not just ourselves, but a universe that's trying to kill us. I mean, that's why I think that, as awful as China, I should be more specific, as the Chinese Communist Party's current configuration is, from a moral standpoint, it seems that way. But if we, say, encounter a hostile alien race in a few thousand years, which I think is not that unreasonable of a prospect, and I think most likely they will be hostile, it's best to expect them to be. If our society is not configured like Starship Troopers, if our society is configured with us all just being tended by machines of loving grace and all just sitting around sitting kumbaya, those aliens will annihilate us immediately, turn us into food cattle, do whatever they want with us. If we are militaristic, organized, and hostile along the lines of like how China is now, that might be the only thing that actually saves us. So it's kind of it's a weird situation when you're thinking about the distant future of humanity. You have to consider situations like that if you're going to be rigorous about it, and you have to open your mind to the potential that the best thing for the species as a whole might actually be the worst thing for individual humans. As unpalatable a thought as that is, if we do the thing as a species that's best for individual humans, and that decision puts us at a deficit as compared to if we were doing something more totalitarian, autocratic like China is, and then we encounter a situation where that deficit means the end of the species, well, then guess what the right decision was? It was being the thing that didn't end the species. Any moral system that through its own moral production causes the species that has created that moral system to go extinct, I would argue that that moral system is invalid. I don't think a moral system is valid if that moral system allows for the annihilation of its not just its individual user, but the entire species that created it. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that's probably not a good moral system. But that's not something that's really often considered in moral philosophy. So I don't really know what to do with that thought. That's just one that's in my head. I call it superseding morality. I've written a bit about it, but it's all really awful because none of it is, when you get in my opinion, when you get serious about looking for truth, you start looking for the things that piss you off. You start looking for thoughts where you're like, oh God, do I ever not want that to be true? You should probably look more into that. The comforting
science,
ones, I tend to avoid those now.
Science doesn't necessarily lead you to realizations that you're going to like. There's nothing about science that says that you're going to like what you find.
Biology is deeply sexist. I mean, you know, you could start with that one, you know, or just basic physics. I mean, the universe is not created with us in mind. It would be very easy to conceive of a universe that would be infinitely better than this one. I mean, you know, why does pain have to not be under our conscious control, for example? Why couldn't we just consciously shut off pain where we're like, okay, I get it. That part's hurting. I've received the data. So now shut off because you're actually getting in the way of me fixing the situation. I'm now in so much pain that I'm incapacitated. Why don't we have a shut-off valve for that? Well, it just hasn't evolved yet. That's why.
Well, we do. It's called shock and stuff like that, and you pass out.
Yeah, right. Yeah, which are not. I mean, which are efficient and better than nothing. It's better to have shock than to be fully conscious and aware while you're being eaten alive. Yeah, I'd rather go into shock, but it could be a lot better than that. We can think of situations where it could be infinitely better than that. So, I mean, you have to immediately discard the idea that the universe was made with us in mind or our happiness in mind, because that's just obviously false. I mean, I don't know how you could accept that. You know, and it's not, I think a lot of Christians feel pressure to accept that, which makes no sense to me. If I was a Christian, I wouldn't assume that God had made the world with us in mind. I would assume that he made the world with him in mind. that would be my assumption. So if it's made with us in mind, that's ancillary. That's just secondary. He's going to be making it for his reasons, not for ours. So
well, yeah,
us having a good time. Good.
You could argue that that is kind of like a distortion of Christianity. That's something that mainstream, you know, like Christianity accepts, but it's not. Like Jordan Peterson, Judeo-Christian guy that he is, you know, he starts with life is suffering and life is a tragedy. I was about to say,
exactly.
So does Buddhism. So do the Eastern traditions, right?
That's right. Absolutely, they do. Yeah. Because it's so undeniable. It's so undeniable that you know, you have to. I mean, I couldn't even conceive of how delusional would you have to be to even argue the inverse. So yeah, the fact that people are still in denial of that is shocking to me. And there's nothing about it that's even Christian. That's why I do like Peterson for that. He's really putting, it's like a muscular
It's probably in the
Christianity.
Old Testament more than anything else. Like the Old
Yeah.
Testament is very rough, very brutal, right?
Yeah, bad things happen to pretty much everyone, good and bad alike. The most
Exactly.
godly of men are tested with the most terrible of tortures. Like, hey,
Right.
Abraham, go gut your kid to prove you love me, so I can win a
Exactly.
bet with Satan. Wow, yeah, that's harsh. That's, you got to do
Peterson's
it.
got an interpretation of that, and also like the Cain and Abel, right? Like you've got
Yeah,
a brother, you've got the good brother Abel, who's making the appropriate. This is what Jordan Peterson's all about. Like if you make the appropriate sacrifices, you can make life good and worth living, and
yeah.
you can be in God's favor and have all of the blessings of life bestowed upon you. And that guy gets murdered by his brother, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if you're hoping for a just world, no. I mean, God could have made it that way, but he had other things in mind. Here's my opinion: if God does exist and he made the universe, there's only one reason that he would make the universe. It's because there's only one reason that an omnipotent being would do anything, and that's boredom. That's the only threat to any omnipotent intelligence that is even conceivable, would be boredom. So if he's going to make the universe, he ain't going to make a boring one now, is he? No, he's going to make a universe where exciting things happen all the time. So yeah, I mean, to me, it's definitely congruent with that
Or
vision.
maybe it's more like well, I mean, this is what reality is. This is what it is, right? It's got the good with the bad. And
Yeah.
so maybe in order for there to be existence, there needs to be the good and the bad. And that's the way it is. Like, because Jordan Peterson talks about how like there's a line running through all of our hearts. I'm sure someone else said it, like Solzhenitsyn or something. But and then so you know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah, it's
basically
what it
the
said.
hostile
What's it? Laughter cuts the heart asunder. Yeah, it's like half is
line between
sorrow
good
and
and
half.
evil
Yeah,
runs down the center of the heart of every living person. So
yeah.
it's like and so that's what he's saying. He's saying there is a way to live that makes life good.
Well, better.
Even though it's a tragedy. Well, no,
Yeah,
he means to make it good, right? Like, and that it takes tremendous amount of sacrifice
yeah,
and everything else. But that's what he's saying. The story of Cain and Abel is about. It's about you've got the example of the one who does that, and then
yeah.
the other person, because you're responding to the reality of life, which is that it's a tragedy, right? We're limited. We have to die. Life is full of pain and suffering.
Well, and that's not a
But
sugarcoating story either. That's not painting a pretty picture. That's like, look at this guy. He
no,
did everything right, and he just got the shaft, which is
but
that's real life. I mean, that's
that's part of it. But the other part of it is that he was actually like his life was going well, and it is
yeah,
possible for life to go well. And of course, that's not guaranteeing that bad things aren't going to happen to you.
yeah.
That's part of the story as well. But it's just that Jordan Peterson's telling people that if you make the appropriate sacrifices, then life can be good,
Well, and
despite the fact that it's a tragedy.
it'll have meaning. I mean, meaning to me is where he's strongest, because there's such a deficit of meaning in, particularly in young men's lives right now. I mean, that's, it's where his core audience is, right? And it's,
You say the
now that,
same about women too. Like some people are starting to talk about how lost young women are these days.
oh, they're
Mm-hmm.
completely, and it's, again, we don't have modern reinterpretations, positive reinterpretations of those classic archetypes. So we don't have a lot of women out there now making, okay, I shouldn't say this like I'm some authority. I'm not aware of a lot of women out there now making being a stay-at-home mom exciting. I shouldn't put that burden on women. I'm not aware of the media. I'm not aware of any social, societal programming that is highlighting the utterly essential, wonderful nature of a woman who decides to give everything that she has towards raising the next generation of
That would
children.
be the conservative voices. That would be
Yeah,
people who
that's
believe in the
them.
traditional family. Yeah.
But the problem with their voice is that when they say that, they're not reconceptualizing it in a modern way, or at least that's not how they're perceived. They're, because sometimes it's wrapped up, like anytime you have a tradcon woman who says, my husband is the man of the house, that's it, it's done right there. No one, you're not talking to anybody except conservatives anymore. They're not listening. It needs to be framed in a way that's not in that tradcon way, but that's still congruent with that pattern of behavior. It needs to be put in a way that's empowering, not that, or that's going to be, sorry, I'll be more specific, it needs to be put in a way that's going to be interpreted as empowering by, for example, a lot of these lost young ladies who have done what they've been told to do. They're incredibly career oriented. They're successful in their careers. They're financially independent. They're very strong and capable. And yet now they're like kind of 30 something, and they're sort of, they just have like that ennui. They just suddenly, they don't know what to do. There's this dirge of meaning, and they're like, it feels like there's something more I'm supposed to be doing, but I don't know what it is. And now for some of them, it might not be becoming a mom and raising the next generation of children, but none of them are being told that that's even a good option. They're being told like that's the old way. That's the old way. So there's an implication, there's a connotation to that right away, that if you do that, you're not modern, that you're traditional, that's conservative. And it's just like, you can reconceptualize it in a way where it's palatable to creative, liberal, leftist people. It's totally possible. But they seem to be the ones that are most interested in denigrating it at the moment, despite the fact that the science does not support that. The science actually, everything, again, as we were talking earlier, everything about early childhood education and all of the stats from the Department of Justice tell us that having a dedicated parent, be it a mother or a father, be it they can be same gender, doesn't matter. Just having two parents in a household and having one of them dedicated to the whole job is better for the outcome of the children than anything else. And an interesting point Peterson made that I really like to bring up is, because people talk about it, because it's like, oh, well, how should we talk about that? How should we make that decision? And Peterson said, who speaks for the children in that situation? For those children growing up? When we talk about like, when he got in trouble for the whole enforced monogamy thing, right? Because of his word choice with that, even though it was perfectly clear what he meant.
That's a scientific term. And
exactly.
He said that the person he was talking to knew what it meant too, but they intentionally twisted it for the media.
Yeah. And it's just, now I'm just getting pissed thinking about that one. It's like, he's not saying just enslave yourself. We've got to talk
about social norms for monogamy.
Yeah, and that again, it's just, I don't understand how leftists can be opposed to it when all the science is supportive of it, including the science
reason
that they should really like that the gay and lesbian couple, that the same sex couples who dual partner raise kids, those kids are just as successful as the heteronormative ones. Why are we not screaming that from the rooftops? Like it.
Well, it's you know what I think? I think it's because, and a lot of these people, they don't know it because they're just, a lot of people, they join this tribe, they join this this cult, and then they
ideology.
They just take on its tenets uncritically. But the idea is that, this stuff goes back, to the Marxist schools, like the Austrian school and stuff like that. This was all strategic in order to disrupt society, because they wanted the overthrow of capitalism. They wanted destabilization. So they wanted, the family. They went after the family, and they went after the church, the family and the church.
Yeah.
And so, and the idea was, because they thought capitalism was evil, which many of them do outright, and so they're trying to break it down. And
and they didn't see that they weren't replacing it with anything. They're taking.
Back then
they're taking that away.
Ideal. Now they don't even have a utopian ideal.
And now now we know, because we've run the experiment a bunch of times, now we know what replaces those institutions. It's the state. The state
Much
replaces them,
worse. And
which
it's
is
like,
infinitely worse. Yeah.
yeah,
The state sucks at raising kids. It really sucks at raising kids. Again, Romanian orphanages, those were state-run orphanages. Those were state-run kids. Most of them turned into psychos. I mean, yeah, yeah. And again, it's like that thing where I was talking about, where people on the left, just as a general rule, have this immense gullibility. They have the proper skepticism when it comes to like corporations and anything capitalist, but as soon as it comes to like anything autocratic and governmental or bureaucratic, all of a sudden, oh yeah, it'll be fine. No, there's no problem with that. One overarching massive power structure to ensure equality across the whole society, no, it'll be fine. That won't go wrong. People will be in charge of that, but they'll be as equal as everyone that they enforce those directives upon. They won't be separate. They won't be more equal than equal. You know, some are more equal than others. That won't happen and hasn't been predicted in Animal Farm.
yeah,
Right. I mean, just, you know, who are we kidding anymore? It's why when I listen to like these Black Lives Matter people, and you start, it's like, okay, yeah, you're anti-capitalist. I get it. I'm not a big fan of capitalism. As soon as something better comes along, you tell me, and I'll sign up. But what do you have? Ooh, boo, boo, boo.
exactly.
And it's always, they never say communism, but they always say collective. It's always something collective. And as soon as you hear collective, that's just a dog whistle for communism. That means that if you follow the trail back, because the people you talk to never know the deep structure of the ideology they're representing. They never
No,
know what is at the foundation, what's at the roots. So you always have to send them back to their masters to, you know, it's strangely enough, it was like talking to Mormons in the old days that would come door to door. You present them with biblical problems they couldn't answer, and they go away looking distressed, talk to their council of elders, and then come back a few weeks later with an answer. So again, it's literally religious behavior. It's
it is. It
how
is.
can they not see it?
It's you know, it's resistant to opposition. It has its, you know, reflexive responses. It's
They're literally afraid of even of holding so that they have their ideology, and then they have the idea that's being presented that's contrary to something in that. They're afraid to even hold that idea temporarily in their mind space, in their head, just to like poke at it and see if it makes sense. Even with a bias, they won't even do it with a bias. They will not synthesize the thought in their head in a genuine way. It's like they're afraid of contamination. It's
that's so interesting that you say that, contamination, right? Like
yeah.
that is like a big part of Nazism and what that was all about, right? Do you
Peterson
know?
talks about that.
Oh man,
Yes.
do you know
The
that, like,
contamination
in that
language
time?
was like the body of
Yeah.
the, yeah.
Well, do you know that there was a lot of pathogens going around at that time, like plagues and or whatever it was, you know, whatever diseases were around there. And
Yeah.
so Peterson correlated, like, one of the most high correlations found in nature, right, in when it comes to psychological things, is the correlation between pathogen and authoritarian attitudes.
That's right. Closed, thick borders. Because when
Right.
you have pathogens flying
There
around,
you go.
you
Yeah.
don't want to be having open borders with tribes that are going to be infecting you. You close your borders and you get hostile.
And
Your in-group, out-group selection gets a lot more definitive. And
yeah, and
there's,
and
yeah,
people who
I
are
heard him
like
talk about that.
people who are really susceptible to like pathogen avoidance and everything are like you can relate it to personality. And then disgust is one of like the 6 or 7 basic emotions that expresses itself on the face, right?
Yes,
Like
that's right.
they disgust. And what is disgust? Disgust is fear of contamination.
That's right. And when he
So
talked about the way Hitler like all the, as soon as he said contamination language, that just unlocked something in my head. And I just started looking for, yeah, for descriptions. I mean, you can really see it in a lot of racist, anything that talks, like some of the really hardcore right-wing stuff, talking about immigration. Like, you watch Hannity long enough, you'll see him describe immigrants using contamination language. Absolutely, you know, influx.
right,
They're
which is
always
not
described
good.
as being like an
That's a
infection.
terrible thing. But at the same
Yeah,
time, I mean, when it comes to like like borders and the necessity to protect them. I was just watching a video, shift gears a little bit. I was watching a video with the comedian Theo Vaughn and a border security guard. A border security guard, and I only watched the first half hour, or maybe I watched about an hour of it, but it's longer than that, and it's just so interesting to think that people have no idea. People have no idea how insecure the border is, and the kind of people that are coming through it, and how that's a serious problem, and they automatically, because it's all about, you know, being against Trump, and so you never hear.
They've been told that there is no border crisis. And
there's
that
a border
the border is fine. So they've been told that. So in their head, what that means is that anything that's the contrary of that is lies, fake news. It's always coming from the right, and they don't have to listen to it. They don't even have to contemplate it.
That everything Trump says is wrong. So Trump is 100% wrong about the border, and therefore you're never going to hear anything on the news about the real problems at the border.
Yeah, and if you do, you won't pay attention to it, because it's only going to be on Fox. It's going to be on a right-wing source.
Right.
So that immediately allows you to discount it. And it's funny, my parents are, my mom and stepdad are about as apolitical as it gets. And I don't, bother them with my theories or anything like that, or criticize them for how they ingest media. But they're pretty status quo. Even they, a couple of years ago, all of a sudden one day, I mentioned CNN, and they said, "Oh, we don't watch CNN anymore." I said, "Really?" And because they're both very liberal, very left wing, and they said, "Well, I mean, we watch it, but it's just, we can't take it seriously anymore." And they started watching Fox News, and they're so not concerned. Oh my God, you say Stephen Harper, and my mom spits. Like, but they articulated to me. I didn't put words in their mouth. They articulated to me why they were doing it, and it's exactly why I'm doing it. They're watching it the same way. CNN tipped its hand so much. They became the Clinton News Network. It was so obvious.
You know what? They're dying. But my father still watches CNN.
Like uncritically, like as the news.
Oh yeah, and he thinks Trump needs to go to jail and all that. And he's completely anti-Fox News. Fox News is a joke, and in some respects, but at the same time,
Fox News is a joke. But whatever metric you're going to use whatever mechanism that you're going to use to criticize Fox News, you apply that mechanism to MSNBC or CNN, and it's going to come up with just as many things. So
just as many, if not more.
Yeah, so it's like, criticize Fox News all you want. That's fine. I'll join in. They're hilarious. But once we're done that, you need to be just as vociferous, just as vitriolic when we're discussing the flaws of CNN. And if you're not willing to do that, then, well, you've just exposed your bias. Like, there's no rational reason for that. Come on, was it Fox News that leaked the debate questions a week ahead of time to the head of the national committee involved with that debate? No, it was CNN to Debbie Wasserman Schultz when she was head of the DNC. That wasn't Fox. Was it the Trump campaign that picked up that person after they resigned in disgrace from the head of the national convention? No, it wasn't. It was the Clinton campaign that picked up Debbie Wasserman Schultz and gave her a raise after resigning in disgrace for the whole CNN thing. So
I think the legacy media,
it's too obvious. It's just too obvious now. Yes. Oh God, it is. Anyone who
it's done.
It will literally die out with the people who watch it. I mean, like CNN. Right. I heard someone say that the only reason CNN's still around is because of doctors' offices. And I think, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think the people who watch it uncritically are dying out. It's just, it's the amount of, the amount of gullibility you have, the amount of red flags you have to ignore now is, but there are people who are doing it. I mean, we live in polarized times. My own family, two of my aunts who are sisters no longer speak to each other and have disowned each other over Trump. They're Canadian. I've spoken to both of them, and the first thing I said was, when the topic came up was, you know that Trump's not our leader, right? That's
Yeah.
some reach when the leader of another country is breaking up families here. I mean, you really couldn't work it out. Like you
No, but the reality is that political polarization, we see it, and we see how big it is, and how,
yeah.
like, people see the tension and realize that it's a real issue. And so that's why people now more than ever are so involved in United States politics.
Well, and I mean, how can it's not by accident that Canadians define ourselves mostly by how we're not like Americans. You know what I mean? Like Canada's national identity is basically just how it's antithetical to America. That's not
It
by
has
accident.
been.
It has
It
to
has
be.
been, but now the
It
thing
has to
that's
be. We're
ruling.
next to a country that has a cultural output like nothing more than the rest of the world put together, and we share the longest border with them. I mean, it's a miracle that we have a distinct identity at all.
But we don't much. We like to think we do.
Not
We're
as much
so
as we
much
could.
like the United States, but
yeah.
In some ways, obviously not. But I mean, man, though the politics here are exactly the same as they are in the United States right now. That is taking over from that attitude of we're superior to the U.S. We're so much different from the U.S.
The lack of the lack of sophistication. It's been plummeting. When what's his name? The head of the NDP. He, when it was around his last name Singh, when the Me Too movement was really going, I'll have to Google it, but there's a quote. He spoke to the media and he said, and I quote, that the presumption of innocence is only for the courts. And this was in the context of the witch hunts of the Me Too era. And I've spent days unpacking how stupid that statement is.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's the
I don't think I have
foundation of society.
Well, at the bare minimum, I don't understand like how the presumption of innocence only for the courts. Okay, so the courts are the most important context in which we judge things in human society. They have the highest consequence. So why would you? So that's what that means, is that presumption, that thing is the best. It's the best we figured out.
It is. It is. It's
so why would you not export it to everything else?
It has been. It always has been. Like the presumption of innocence, we all know how important it is that people are innocent until proven guilty. The fact that we're going to abandon that is so dangerous. So that's just going back to what we were before we developed that, which was much more tribal, much more violent, much more chaotic.
Well, yeah, I mean, at that point, you might as well bring back dueling at that point. It might keep a lid on some things.
Well, you have people killing each other in the streets in the United States, and that's going to spill over to Canada.
Yeah, I think it will. It will. Oh God, that whole gun violence thing in the United States. I mean, that's all a product of it too. And it's, and people get distracted by I just did it. I called it gun violence. It's not gun violence. You take away all the guns, they're going to be killing themselves with other things. I mean, it's people are focusing on the wrong things, and that polarization, it makes it 10 times worse. Like Maxine, that Maxine Waters, does she understand that everyone's cheering about that Chauvin verdict? It's going to get tossed on appeal.
It's going to get tossed because of Maxine Waters.
100%. The judge in the trial just said it.
He said it.
Like, that I'm confident that is without analog in American history, a judge saying that in that context. I don't think people just aren't thinking about the repercussions of what they're doing. They're not thinking these things through. It's like, what happens if we abandon the rule of law? What happens if we abandon the presumption of innocence and go back to vigilante justice in the streets, which is literally what they're asking for? They're not thinking through the consequences of that. Because if you spent even 5 seconds thinking about just extrapolating it in your head, think, what's the worst that could happen? Human civilization ends. That's the worst that could happen. The species goes extinct. That's the worst that could happen. We have nukes. We can't fool around as though we're just playing with antelope thigh bones anymore. We can't just flip the table and think that the pieces aren't going to cause havoc when they land.
To think that something better is just going to rise in its place without any, without any careful thinking that through and knowing what that's going to look like. Nobody knows what that's going to look like.
No, that's true. And I get that people are upset at capitalism for its flaws, which those flaws are there and they can articulate them and I'll agree with them, but they don't have it. But the thing that they're just not accepting is that we don't have anything better. We don't. We tried. We tried. We thought we had something.
It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare.
Yeah. Every time we've run that experiment, it led to a stack of corpses. So, and a shattered economy.
Mountains of corpses.
Yeah, and empty zoos because they ate their zoo animals. So yeah, we don't need to run that experiment anymore. So as bad as capitalism is, we're not abandoning it. We're sticking with it until we figure out something better. And it's unlikely that we're going to come up with something that is like a complete change where you completely export capitalism and import this new thing. It's going to be a gradual change probably that takes place in just micro changes over hundreds of years. That's not
if it's going to work. It is
by anyone. It's not going to be under the control of anyone. It's just going to happen.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I'm confident that we're not going to wipe ourselves out. It's going to happen. We're going to make ourselves more congruent. The only thing I worry about is that I think in the future, individual freedom is going to take a back seat, but
maybe that's something we can talk about next time.
I'm a determinist. I don't really believe in it anyways. So I don't get too worried about a future where we have like accurate mind reading technology. I look forward to that. I don't lie. So I would like to see a truth serum developed. I would like to see people, shot in the face for lying, like my post. I would just, that'd be, I'm not afraid of the future like so many people are. Healing's terrified of AI. I'm excited. AI is going to be amazing. We're going to make ourselves gods. Like, it's just, everyone just thinks about what's the worst case scenario when it comes to that sort of thing. And it's like, okay, what's the best case scenario? No one's talking about that. Well, why don't we talk about that? What's the best case scenario for a woman deciding to be a stay-at-home mom?
That's what
people are just talking about the worst case. Oh, you're just a part of the patriarchy. You'll blah, 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 blah. No, there's a way to articulate it that makes it amazing. Why don't we do that?
Science fiction was driven by utopian visions mainly when, when it began.
We write the future. We kind of create the future when we write it. I mean, iPads were in Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I swear to God, iPads are totally based off that. They look exactly like the palm readers that they were using on Next Generation.
God, remember when video calling was science fiction? It was a dream.
2001, yeah, had video calling from the moon, and it was like, holy crap. And now it's lit. And they couldn't conceive of how much better the future is. They like the future people didn't understand mainly micronization. They didn't understand how good we were going to get at making things really small, like the computing power of your cell phone, compared to the computing power it took to put men on the moon. Like it's not really graspable. I don't think it's just, you couldn't, it's not their fault for not being able to conceive of it. And much the same way, it's not our fault for not being able to conceive of the things that are going to happen in the future, the unknown unknowns, which, to tie it all up back to humility, is why I think adopting a humble attitude in any intellectual pursuit is better than an arrogant one, because arrogance just kind of presumes that we know enough to be confident. And as much as Keeling hates it when I say this, I don't think we know enough to be confident. I think we're in an age of exploration and discovery. I don't think we're in an age of knowing things. I think we're in an age of discovering things. And I think we should be happy that we're in that age, and we should accept that the answers that we formulate now are vastly inaccurate compared to the ones we're going to come with the future. And we should not shy away from that. We should not let that inhibit us in any way. We should embrace that, because there's no reason that has to be a negative thought.
That's a rational attitude. But we're
Yeah,
not
to me,
wired
it's
that
immensely
way.
positive.
By evolution,
Not
we're not wired
naturally.
that way.
No, but you can create,
You can override that.
you can override it. You can create permanent psychological structures and mechanisms in your head that override that completely. Absolutely. I've done it personally, and other people have been doing
Right.
it and writing about it for thousands of years. So, I mean, it's there's no reason to be pessimistic. You only have to be pessimistic if you're a determinist. And even then, you're not pessimistic, because pessimism and optimism don't really make any sense anymore. It's just action and consequence and the playing out of physical forces and whatever. But I'm not going to talk about determinism. So my goal for tonight was, don't talk about determinism. It'll be way more interesting if you don't go down that rabbit hole. Because nobody's interested in talking about that except a few people. It's just, it's determinism is the future. It's not now. Determinism is what we're going to be that's the frame we're going to be thinking in thousands of years, not now. It doesn't work for now.
I think it would be fun next time to have futurism be the topic.
Use just like what's it going to look like? How are we going to be?
What could it look like? What are the possibilities? Right?
Yeah,
just explore
right.
That.
The media has fully explored the negative possibilities. We understand the 18 million different ways that we could annihilate ourselves as a species, or something external could annihilate us. We've explored that. How about we explore like some positive things? How about we have conceptions of the future, of future cities that are beautiful? I know, because
if it bleeds, it leads, right?
I know we're so obsessed with this death force that's in us, and that's very Freudian too, and very natural. I have a lot of thoughts on that actually, but we should probably postpone that one for another time. I don't think we'll, like, a thought I've had is, I don't think we'll have anything approaching freedom in any sense until we have some kind of functional immortality. I think as long as we're mortal, that's too big to ignore. It's too difficult to have long range projects when you know that you're not going to survive it. I think we'll be a lot nicer to each other too, I think, once we're all immortal. I think as soon as we're all immortal and we're not in each other's way anymore, and we don't have finite resources, and it's not a zero-sum game anymore, we're just going to be, to me, that's like, to me, I kind of stopped trying to compose my own, like make a Kantian ethics that works or something. I gave up on individual morality because I reached the conclusion in my head that even if you came up with a moral system that was perfect, it's not enactable as long as we are still subject to these fundamental evolutionary and biological forces that are always going to be present because of our situation, because of our mortality, because of
that's what I was saying too. Like, it's not just that. It's not just the idea that we're finite and mortal. It's I know you don't like the word programs. It's just an efficient word to get the idea. Like it's cognitive biases, right? They have biological bases, right? So when you, like, one cognitive bias,
we think life is valuable. Well, how convenient for us being living things. I mean,
and so like time discounting. So you're talking about it's difficult for us to have long-term projects and visions. It is because our psychology is that way. Time discounting, future discounting, is where we don't think the future is important, and we have natural tendency to be concerned with now. And
we're not naturally good at sacrificing the present
for the future.
Exactly. We're not programmed, to use your word for that. Well, if only we were, that would make things a lot easier.
Right, and yet that's what. So Jordan Peterson is saying that the Old Testament, the Bible, the biblical stories, like, one of the great realizations in that is that we can sacrifice for the future.
That's right.
We can sacrifice things in the present for the future. That's what human sacrifice is all about. That was like a physical act that was related to that realization that we can sacrifice. We can sacrifice the present for the future.
It's an act of trust. And I think that's where people fall down. It's easy with religion because you trust in the religion, you cargo cult it in, you're good to go. If you don't have it nested within that, to just have this idea separate from everything else, not nested within a comforting religion or something, or taught to you or whatever. Just this idea that I'm going to accept a bunch of suffering now and it's going to pay off in the future. That's trust. You don't know. You don't
Exactly.
know. You just have to trust that it's going to. But of course, the great thing is that if you trust it once and do it, you find out, oh, it worked. And then you do it again and again and again. But so it's funny that people now will trust in so many things, but they won't trust in that. They won't trust that, you know, or
Because they've abandoned tradition. They've abandoned those stories that told us that that's the way it is.
they've also abandoned the idea of merit, you know, meritocracy. Like that's gone
Well,
out.
yeah.
That's gone out the window. So the idea that people have accumulated what they have as a direct correlation of working harder and smarter, well, no, that's racist if you think
That's not
that.
going to have good consequences.
Right. Yeah, that's the one. And that's not congruent with their worldview, because their worldview is that, well, I mean, basically the left has enshrined the external locus of control. Everyone's just a leaf on the wind. Everyone is a victim of their upbringing, of their circumstance, of the society in which they're born, and the innate prejudices and all that sort of thing. And it's just this hopeless cause. You can't get above it. And if you see anyone who's worked really hard for what they have, like a rich person, well, they don't have it because they worked really hard, because that's suggesting that people who aren't rich aren't working really hard, and that's racist. Even though, well, working really hard doesn't guarantee that you'll become rich, but if you're not born into money, you're not going to become rich unless you work really hard. I mean, so it feels like they're kind of confusing one thing with the other there. It's like, yeah, you don't have to
They're
work
giving
hard,
they're
but
giving a simplistic answer to a complex issue.
if
They're
that isn't the like the headline of our times, is
yeah.
giving simplistic answer, like we were going back to, just having the inability to have any sort of sophistication, even in our conception of people, having a conception of a leader of the opposite political party to the one that you belong to, who can do both good and bad things, is not possible now for I would say a vast majority of the American population and a good chunk of the Canadian one. I
Well,
mean,
maybe
it's just,
half. I mean, if you look at how many
Trump,
people
and
voted for Trump again, right?
yeah.
So there's a lot of people that are not on board
Well,
with
it just,
that.
all you have to do is say, like, it's just, you can find it with, you could find it just by with two questions, because the first question is just to identify which political leaning they have, and then the second question is just ask them to, you know, analyze the actions of a leader from the opposite side, and then analyze the actions of a leader from their own side and see how they do. It's going to be pretty obvious that they're not using the same, you know, metrics, and they're not being fair, you know.
So the evolutionary explanation for that is that we are not wired to seek truth. We are wired to function in a social group,
correct.
right? We're tribal, tribal minded.
Yeah.
So
In group
in group
selection is much more
yeah,
important than truth. And
right.
and in group and out group selection is challenged and made more difficult. It's difficult to exclude people into an out group. The more you understand them, the more you understand their perspective, the more you allow yourself to agree that maybe they aren't pure demons, that maybe there is some good to them. The more you go
And
down that road,
that's another thing that humans tend to do. It's the human tendency to think of the people who are outside your group as pure evil, right? That's
right.
That's that tribalistic mentality. They're not considered people, right?
No.
And that's why there was, you know, so much inter-tribe violence.
There's no way. It's I mean, that's the only way it could be. There would be no way for that in-group out-group mentality to maintain itself if it allowed for you to also have a deep and sophisticated understanding of your out group. As soon as you have that understanding of them, I think just automatically you're going to include them in your circle of sentiments. You're going to have compassion for them. If you achieve a certain level of understanding with them, it's impossible not to. It's why when you have a war, like in World War I, when there was that Christmas truce, and then the guys came out of the trenches and played soccer, and the generals hate, oh God, on both sides, the leadership was so against it, so appalled, and it never happened again. And it's because they realized, like, it's more difficult for you to shoot that guy in the face if you just played soccer with him and you know that he's got a kid named Manfred, and that, you know, he's like got some same health
It's much
problems
more
you do.
difficult to do that in that
It's
case.
impossible. You just can't, you
Impossible.
can't
Yeah.
do it. So those systems always have to have that mechanism which prevents you from achieving any kind of a sophisticated understanding
But
of that outgroup.
that's wired though, you know, like that.
It has to be.
It's wired in us.
100%. Oh God, yeah, and it has to be.
Naturally.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's completely natural. There's no, I mean, it's why I think that if we do find intelligent life elsewhere that's advanced, that's sophisticated, it's highly likely that its evolutionary path, like the taxonomic, the morphology will be wildly different, but the path of that, like in-group, out-group psychology, something akin to that is gonna be there, because I just don't see how it would be possible for something to advance. It would be like the hawks and doves thing. You know, if everyone, if all the organisms are just perfectly accepting of all other organisms except for one, well, that one's just gonna like friggin' dominate them. It's like the hawks and doves. You know, if you have one hawk and a bunch of doves, you got a bunch of dead doves. So I mean, it's, you have to, yeah, there's no way that I could see that you could, that a species could evolve primacy over the other species without having some kind of in-group, out-group mechanism. I mean,
Interesting. Yeah. And then,
I
and then
don't
to
see
get
how.
over it,
Yes.
and then to overcome it,
Or not.
or not.
I mean,
Well, you're saying,
or
you're
to
talking about
channel it.
Right.
Yeah, to channel, I mean, or to simply have it where it, I mean, we've seen with ourselves that the way that we immediately can overcome in-group, out-group hostility on a small level is to have a larger external threat, right? That's significantly different from both those groups. So you could have an alien race that just goes around the universe finding other alien races to fight, and it's just caught, like a dictator is just constantly keeping themselves with an enemy to hate, so that they never have to actually reconcile their own their own psychological programming. They just always have an other to go after. That would be my fear, is that we run into an alien civilization that's really hooked on othering other alien civilizations and beating the crap out of them, so that way they never have to focus on their own issues, which we see that ourselves. That's what Putin's doing right now in Russia. He's having a terrible time in Russia. So what is he doing? He's going to start a war with the Ukraine. I mean, it's, that's really natural and biological. I think we'll see that behavior in alien species that have evolved in completely alien environments. I bet we're going to see similar psychological constructs in them. I mean, I just don't, I think they're inevitable.
Do you think it's intractable?
Intractable in, like, we can't overcome it?
Yeah.
No, we can overcome it.
Like you said, if you can understand the other,
you can either directly overpower it and overwrite it, but I think that's more for the future. I think Peterson's correct in that you want to go with it. You don't want to go against it. So I mean, you can definitely control it, and you can channel it into avenues that are productive and that are actually going against what it's trying to do. That's the better way
so
to do it. To just
that's
try
the
and
monster in
override
us.
it.
Then that's the
part of it.
shadow, young shadow. It's that will to destroy enemies. And then we have to channel that. You have to master that, incorporate it into yourself. So because you can't just get rid of the shadow. And I don't entirely know what Jung was talking about, and I don't, I'm not an expert on it. But I'm just wondering, do you think you need to be formidable? Do you think that humans will ever get over in-group, out-group mentality, or that they could?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, it's possible. I think in-group, out-group mentality is made necessary by mortality and scarcity of resources. I think that once we have conquered mortality And once we no longer have a scarcity of resources, so once everyone has as much of whatever they want all the time, I think it, at that point, I think we will only come together when we want to come together, and we'll mostly be apart.
Really?
So,
You don't think we'll still be able to be social?
well, I think you will be. You'll have people being social, but just purely by consent. Just it'll be the purest of, like, you won't feel any pressure, I think, to be social. You won't need friends. You won't need anything unless you just want it.
We'd need
But,
an entirely different limbic system, eh? There's a lot of things that we'd have to overcome in order to get to somewhere like that.
well,
Because
yeah,
we
I
have,
mean,
with human sexuality, you've got conflict built right into that for sure.
yeah, you do. I think the vast majority of the in-group out-group chaos is mainly our condition, though, is mainly just the fact that we're mortal, and that it is a zero-sum game right now, that the more some people have, the less others are going to have, and the resentment that causes. And it's, like, it's Star Trek is kind of the best mainstream formulation we have for a society that conquered. Certainly scarcity of resources is no longer, because they don't have money anymore. They literally can convert energy into matter. They have a replicator that's the size of a microwave that can literally make anything. So at that point, being like jealous of another, like keeping up with the Joneses, well, that's gone.
Yeah.
That's gone. And that's so much of, I think, our hostility and in-group out-group is due just simply because we see that other people have more or less than us, and that makes us want it, makes us jealous. As soon as that's completely out the window, everyone has as much of
That's wired
everything
as
that they
well, eh?
want.
The fairness or whatever, jealousy, like all that's
Absolutely, oh, yeah.
totally wired. Yeah, yeah.
You've seen the
The
ones with the
monkey, yeah.
monkeys where they're given some like cake and not
Cucumbers
to
or
the,
something, and then grapes.
yeah, yeah, and then, oh yeah, it better believe that's hardwired.
Yeah.
That was great to see. Seeing that was hardwired, that the play mechanism is hardwired, and that
Oh,
it's
there's so
like
much interesting stuff there.
the
Yeah.
play mechanism, the fact that it's hardwired, and the fact that it's cross species, the fact that that
Mice.
competing species can play with each other, that things that
Oh
will
wow.
normally kill each other can play with each other in certain contexts. That play mechanism can override like everything. I've seen videos of pet coyotes playing with pet cats. Like that, the programming of that coyote is to murder that cat instantly and eat it. But as soon as it puts it in the context of play, no problem. Gentle as a kitten, won't hurt it at all.
And they can be domesticated and have instincts domesticated out of them.
Yeah, and it has that coyote has a mechanism in its head that is stronger than prey. Anything like it has a very small, compared to a human, circle of sentiments, but you can put things into that circle of sentiment, and even if it's a prey item, once it's in that circle, God, we've seen this with like leopards where they kill a mother impala, and then the baby impala, like they bond with the baby, and they don't kill the baby because now it's acting like something that's within their circle of sentiments, and that's
Right.
stronger than prey. That's stronger than the urge to feed off of the damn thing. So I think that, and we have that in us too, and the more that we can figure out ways to get human beings to expand their circle of sentiments and get better at placing people within it, the better we get at that's the opposite of in-group out-group. That's the solution. Will we ever conquer it entirely? I don't see why
No,
we
and
couldn't.
I just misspoke too.
But
I said that you can domesticate their instincts out of them, and I don't think that happens. I think they get overridden and put
yeah, I think we put in other
stop,
things that are stronger,
halted.
that
Yeah.
yeah, that overwrite it, but it's still there. If you were to remove the thing that we put in, that behavior would come roaring right back. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, it's absolutely still there. And I mean, it's once you become I mean, you don't even have to be a determinist. A lot of the evolutionary psychologists are starting to kind of embrace this idea that, like, you know, you look at like for example, the divide between, well, the divide between biology and psychology, I think, is pretty much gone now. But I'm willing to go a lot further. Sociology, like society, it's biological. What else would it be? And more,
Well, I mean,
and
sociology
more,
fancies itself a science, but it's, you know, 25% of sociologists outright identify as Marxist.
oh, I
So
know, but
they've got an
I'm just talking
ideology.
like the subject matter, their domain of interest,
Right.
to me is
It should be scientific. It should be scientifically investigatable. But what
it's
I'm
a
saying is that,
product of our biology, in my opinion, and I don't see what else it could be. And
yeah,
yet
but
that thought is
the
not
ideology
something
is
that,
so ripe in those areas. It's a problem. Like, if
yeah, they can't accept that, despite the
sociology,
fact that it's obviously true, and that there's no, you can't even articulate an alternative. It would just be gobbledygook. It'd be nonsensical. And
I
yet
mean,
they're just like, oh no, it's fine.
well, they
Is it?
purport to be scientific, right? Like, I mean, sociology thinks of itself as a science,
Yeah.
and yet it goes against, you know, what it should be founded on, which is psychology.
Well, they believe in
And
the blank slate.
yeah, exactly. That's what I
So
mean. That's
it's
ideological.
like,
That's not based on science,
yeah,
scientific
and so
research.
it's like, if the blank slate is true, then like, then whence, if the blank slate is true, and society and sociological productions are not biological, well, where the hell did they come from? Like, what generates them if not
They would
our
say it's the
biology?
social system. They
Yeah,
attribute it
so
to
they're gonna,
capitalism.
yeah, so what they're, so basically what they're going to, but what I say is, it's like chicken or the egg, because they're
Exactly.
saying that we're born blank slates, and then the pre-existing society imprints upon us. Okay, where did that pre-existing society first come from?
Exactly. It evolved with us.
Well, it came, yeah, it came with us, so it couldn't have been a
Yeah.
blank slate. Otherwise,
Hmm.
it wouldn't have evolved.
Hmm.
Well, there's no counter to that. So that should be the end of it. And they should all just pack up and discard their degrees, but they're not. And it's like, okay, but I'm not suggesting you do, but you can't ignore that. And they're just flat out, they're like, no, it's not a thing. It's like, okay, well, those days are over. Those days aren't working anymore, because there's this crazy thing called the internet, and 3-hour conversations where we can actually get into it, rather than just having a quick, you know, exchange of talking points, usually talked over each other, and get nowhere. It's, yeah, no, thank goodness for the internet.
It's a beautiful thing.
If it wasn't for the internet, all this crap would still be working. I mean, it would, all this crap, oh, it'd be working better than ever if it wasn't for the internet. Oh, good Lord.
Yeah.
With all the other technology we have, well, the internet's the only thing giving us a chance. Internet and AI. AI is scary, but I'm all for it. We're going to merge with it. We're going to be gods. We won't really be people anymore. I don't know if we'll be human. But I don't care about that. That doesn't concern me. I'm like species centric, but I'm fully open to the idea that, like, the way I conceptualize us building AI is like a hermit crab or like a snail taking bits of its environment that are just random and chaotic and making something better that is useful to itself, but that's separate from itself, that's of the environment and not itself, but is now merged with it. And that's how I think of humans with AI. We're taking, it's just a much more sophisticated way of a snail building a shell, where we could just have this corpus as is, or we could take bits of our environment, make something really, really sophisticated that's not us, that's still of the environment, but then we can merge with it and make ourselves so much more powerful. Snail constructs a shell, we're constructing AI, we're going to merge with it, and it's gonna, oh my goodness, I don't know if we'll be functionally human anymore at that point, but I don't really care. That's just a word problem. Whatever, we're gonna be better. That's all I care. We'll be so much more efficient. When every human being has an AI, it's enslaved to their consciousness. Instant, like memory, having a good memory, we'll all have eidetic memories, all of us, and not some BS kind of eidetic. No, perfect, flawless. All of us will have instant neural interface and recall with all of human knowledge throughout history, life extension technology on top of that, we're going to be looking at the way we are now and the discussions we're having now. I hope
you're
we're
right.
kind. I hope we're kind. I hope we're kind to our past selves. Please take it easy on us. I know factory farming animals for meat is terrible. I know we should be doing way more solar and green. Just go easy on us. We're trying. Future
water
people.
under the bridge. Water under the bridge.
There was no other way. There was no, if you think there's another way, find me the world where it happened. And no, there was no other way. Everything, that's the hardest truth, I think, is that everything's necessary. Every single thing. We don't see where the joinery is. We don't have control groups. We don't have alternate universes. So you can wring your hands as much as you want, but as far as we know, everything, including all the bad stuff, was needed to make this moment happen right now. So that's the ugly truth. That's the hardest one, is that it's all necessary, that there was no other way. This is the way it had to be. And if there's a future where we move out into the stars as some autocratic, individuality crushing entity, like the CCP is turning China into, well, then that's how it is. That's how it's going to be. I'm not afraid of that, because being afraid of it doesn't make a difference. I just like to see it, to see if that happens. I mean, I hope for a better way, but it's like, you can hope for a better way, but the thing you should hope most of all, more than your better way, is that we continue. So if the option is between us becoming an autocratic, individuality crushing kind of collective, and that's the only way that we can make it, well, then that's what we're going to do. So I don't see I don't see a lot of point in hand wringing and becoming upset over that as a possibility. We shouldn't run towards it. Obviously, we should do our best to try and engineer the best future possible for ourselves. But if you're being kind of a detached observer above it all, 10,000 feet, you better be ready for the possibility that what you hope to happen is probably not how it's going to work out. It's probably going to be ugly. You know, how many utopian societies have we had so far? Zero. How many societies have we had so far that have been even close to no? So, I mean, we're not going to get it right in the future either. And technology is going to allow us to be so much more cruel and horrible to each other than, I mean, you you think Hitler was something. We judge atrocity now by like the Holocaust. We're gonna do things to ourselves in the future that we can't even conceive of how evil it's gonna be. We're gonna do things to ourselves in the future that are so evil that our science fiction authors haven't even thought of it yet.
Yeah, but
get ready. I mean,
you got to look at both sides. You got to remember. There's the good side, and it's always going to be there. Human nature will never lose that. So
the good side is we get to keep existing. That's the good side. Is that we're still there. I think
there's more than that. I think there's definitely more than that. I think
there's more than that.
Always going to be people that are saying, you know, society has swung the balance too far in a bad direction, and they're going to fight against that. It's going to be a pendulum swinging, just like it always has been, and probably always will be.
Well, and what's going to happen is going to happen. I mean, it's just not to be fatalistic about it. I mean, except that, well, if you're a determinist, you are fatalistic about it. So it really becomes more of it's just actions and consequences. And once you make it about actions and consequences, once you kind of detach yourself from all the emotions of it when you're thinking about the future, once you detach yourself from what you want the future to be and just make it about what you think the future is most likely to be, I'd be happy to talk with you about it.
Yeah, I think we should get into that.
I've had some interesting thoughts. Most of them are dark, because that's the fun thing to me. That's the part everyone can think about, an idealistic, optimistic future where we're all tended over by machines of ever-loving grace. Fine, boring. I don't know. I'm more interested in, like, where might it get crazy? good and bad. Like, where might it get really wild? Because it's gonna get really wild. It's already crazy. So, oh my goodness, yeah, it's
I
only
think
gonna get nuts.
I think we should go with that. We should continue from there next time.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about how awful and wonderful I think the future is going to be. I think it's going to be
Right.
both.
Right. Good.
Yeah, and it's going to be glorious on top of all of that. I am an optimistic person, which nobody believes, but I'm certain I'm correct about that now. I am optimistic. Humanity is not going to wipe itself out. We're gonna we're gonna do it all. I mean, there's no reason we can't. There's absolutely no reason we can't make ourselves gods, and we're gonna. Great. That's what Peterson's been talking about. Heaven is our conception of heaven is not, we vastly misunderstood it. It's not a place that exists now. Heaven is what we're creating. What's in heaven? A place of perfect happiness where you don't have to die, where everyone has enough, where you can see where, yeah, it's heaven is literally what we are creating. The conception of heaven is very useful to have around because it's a blueprint of what we want, the universe to become. So the Christians are funny to me because it's like you're working so hard to get to a place that doesn't exist because we haven't made it yet, but it's going to exist. We're going to make it. Your conception of heaven is a very good description, using that creative language, using that kind of Jungian, Freudian way of speaking. It's a very good way of describing the unconscious blueprint of the future that our species is clearly writing for itself. Our species wants to live forever. It doesn't want to go to sleep. It wants to dominate its environment. That's what we're doing. It's, when you pull back, you can view humanity at the level of a single organism if you want to. There's literally no reason why you can't. It makes just as much sense as to when you view an individual person, when you think of all the DNA in our bodies that's not human, all the gut bacteria, flora and fauna, trillions of organisms that are all very important to us functioning. But the idea of us caring about any individual gut bacteria in our guts is nonsensical. It's too small. We just can't do it. And thus individual humans might very well be to the human species as a whole. I don't see any reason why you can't view humanity as a sort of one unconscious thing with a bunch of parts.
Because I think that's unsatisfactory. I think that it's one of the important values that we have, in I think all cultures, is the sovereignty of the individual, the value of every individual. I think that's such an important
I'm not discounting
we
that.
develop.
I'm not discounting that. I believe in all of that. What I'm talking about is that, again, it's dangerous thinking. It's about thinking about situations where that is not valued, and thinking about situations where that not being valued is actually for the good of the species. And it's very easy. I can come up with a bunch of situations for that one.
Okay, situations, sure, but at the same time, those situations, like the people making the decisions where this many people need to be sacrificed, etc., they can still have the understanding. Like there's some show called the 100. Have you seen it?
No.
Okay, well that's a situation where they're on they haven't been down to Earth for a long time because there's too much radiation or something. They're up in a spaceship and it's running out of air because the systems are broken down and they can't fix them. And so they have to make a decision where a certain amount of people are going to have to die. And then there's like the human spirit, the human sense of the value of every individual doesn't go away. It almost does. That's the thing. It's like one of the characters has the purely mentality where it's like, well, this has to be done. You have to be able to make that decision, yada yada yada. But then there's another guy who is like that sort of highly moral exemplary person, and so they're like two different leaders that are kind of like head to head in leadership position, and then eventually what ends up happening is that a certain amount of people decide to sacrifice themselves. The required number of people decide to sacrifice themselves. So the human spirit's a beautiful thing. I think I think we never know how
Right,
things are
but
going
I'm
to work
not.
out.
I probably wasn't articulating it well. I wasn't talking anything about that. I was just ways of thinking about the world, reality, that sort of thing. A useful way I found was of thinking as humanity as one organism, and just thinking just not as like the definitive way of thinking about it, but just as an interesting lens. It's an interesting thought experiment because the analogy holds up pretty well, and you can do some fun things with it. I'm trying to tie it into, I don't remember who said it. There was somebody who was talking about like different kinds of intelligence and about how they were thinking about, like they were using the example of a mosquito, the intelligence of a mosquito versus the intelligence of like a primate or a person. So where a person, we can do this thing where we can think about the future. We have imagination and we can synthesize possible situations and run them in our head to try and deduce the results without actually performing it in real life. This has obvious advantages because you don't have to risk things. But another way of what could be considered intelligence is that if you have, so you have the mosquito, which at an individual level, a mosquito is functionally brainless. But if you have, say you just take a mass of mosquitoes and, or say you take all mosquitoes and you can say, well, what that is that's one organism. And rather than synthesizing every possible option that it could do and trying to figure out if it works, it's just doing it. It's making zillions of copies of itself that are pretty random and pretty mindless, but are carrying out this programming, are going out, and some of them are going to hit pay dirt and they're going to find the right thing to do. And then that's going to multiply, et cetera, et cetera. And when you suss that out, that mechanism in its production looks awfully similar to intelligence, but it's intelligence without consciousness. It's it's figuring out the most effective way to act in the world by trying every possible way that it can through replicating itself zillions of times and actually running the experiment with the copies of itself, if that makes any sense.
It does.
And that to me opened up, I'm still struggling with that, but I get it. I get that that's a very different way of thinking about intelligence than we normally think, but
Oh, well, no,
it has validity to it. I mean, it's,
that's interesting. Jordan Peterson talks about intelligence, thinking about things in a very similar way. He says, like, organisms are like that. Organisms, they make billions of copies of themselves, and many of them die. And humans have this ability to imagine a version of themselves and to run that through in their head, and then have that version of themselves, that imagined version of themselves, die.
Yeah.
So that they don't have to, right?
Yeah, it's clearly superior at the level of the individual because the individual doesn't have the risk. At the level of the organism, there's where you could start arguing it a bit, because the difference between the human and the mosquito is that the human is synthesizing it, the mosquito is actually doing it. So the mosquito is getting 100% accurate real world data. There's no synthesis involved whatsoever. It's not using wetware to try and replicate the world in its head and run the physics of it. It's just actually going out there doing it and getting absolutely verifiable real world results. So there's definitely a pro and a con to both. The pro to the synthesis is that it's a huge boost to the individual. The pro to the con to it is that the data is synthetic. So the pro to the species that does not value the individual, as the mosquito doesn't, is that the data it's getting is real world. It's 100% accurate. The con seems to be that it's not conscious. So, or if it is, it's a type of consciousness that is as difficult for me to understand as that type of intelligence is. It would be a very different way of thinking about consciousness. I don't think it would work personally. You'd have to like come up with a new word or something, but I mean, there's something to that where it's like you don't like the primacy of the individual is sacrosanct in every sense that I can think of, except for one, which is if you choose to look at the species at a view where the individual becomes indistinct. Just you don't see the individual anymore. You're too high up. It's like a 10,000-mile view. And you can look at the species from that level, and there's no individuals anymore. And once you start looking at it from that level, it takes on the attributes of an individual organism. And once you start looking at it that way, you can start coming up with some thoughts that are interesting. I don't know if they're true, but they seem to follow. And I've had a few of them. It's been interesting to me. And they mainly go around like questions like what's best for the species as opposed to what's best to the individual, because the answer to those questions are very different. What's best
So give
for
me
the
an
species?
example. Give me an example of something best for the species that's not good for the individual.
Sure. So I mean, if we have the hypothetical that in say 1,000 years there's going to be some kind of external galactic cataclysm that's going to wipe out humanity unless we have achieved a certain level of technology necessary for us to not be wiped out by it. We don't have to define it, doesn't matter. So in the two scenarios, we have one version of humanity that carries on more or less like we are now, where we're putting the primacy on individuality. We're a collection of nation states. Self-determinism is a big thing. We're anti-collectivist, blah, blah, blah. And we carry on the way we do. And we get to that point and we do not develop the necessary technology to escape this cataclysm, and we are wiped out. And the reason that we do not develop the technology is just a lack of focus. We're too busy fighting each other, doing other things. Really the only way to get to that level of technology is to have the species quite collectively focused on that goal. So now we have another alternate world where it's the same galactic cataclysm in the same amount of time. In that world, the Chinese Communist Party or something akin to it, something autocratic, something collectivist that does not have a lot of use for individuality, takes over the globe, conquers humanity, and we achieve that technological level necessary to save the species from extinction. We do that at the expense, you can make it as extreme as you want, because it probably would be pretty extreme, at the extreme expense of individual liberty and probably involving a lot of individual suffering. In that case, that would be a case where the suffering of all those individuals was absolutely the correct decision, because without their suffering, there would be no more individuals. Anyway, there wouldn't be anything.
That's really interesting. I think we should pick it up there, because we should continue with that next time.
Excellent. All right. Sounds like a good plan. And I've enjoyed our conversation immensely.
Yeah, it's been great, man. Thanks a lot for doing this.
Thanks for having me. All right. Can we cut
Take
there?
Care.
Yeah. My done act. Cool. All right. Well, yeah, I'll leave it there. And then, so what's actually send me your, like, you have a channel or something, right? Or
yeah, I do.
Send me your channel. I've never actually watched any of yours. I probably should have watched something before I came on here. That would have been better, but
no, it's all right.
Maybe it's better that I
did. Just a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I'd be feeling like I had to measure up to other people or something.
It's going to be different with every guest that I have, and you've been a great guest. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Cool. Well, I hope that's if you're blowing smoke, it is sweetly blown, and I accept.